Hello, everybody, and welcome back to part two of the inaugural episode of the Political Reformation, where we are going through and doing a presidential tier list. Joining me, as always, is my co-host Harry. And while it may be a couple of days for you between uploads, this was like 15 minutes for us. So that's why we're still wearing the same clothes. Harry's beard has not gotten any less scraggly, and Teddy is still firmly affixed to my forehead at this point in time.
I think we're doing a good job because it looks like we're building a bell-shaped curve for the most
We
part.
are kind of building a bell curve here. Well, we don't have anybody in A or S tier yet, so we haven't quite moved that way. But looking at who's left in the gamut that we're running here, I see us moving forwards and getting a few A's, or getting at least a couple of A's, and I see two S tiers already. But we'll get there. We'll get there. So let's go ahead and transition to the next screen here. Everybody should be seeing the tier list now. This is where we're at currently. 2 in B, 3 in C, 7 in D tier. We're running kind of lousy today. 2 in F tier. And between shootings, I went ahead, shootings of the video, shootings of video, let's be clear, YouTube gods and algorithms and Susan Wojcicki, don't hate me because I use an industry term, okay? Let's go.
A
Uh,
film industry term,
yes, a
not a
film.
mercenary industry
Yes, a
term.
film industry term. Anyways, I went ahead and moved the portraits of Donald Trump and Barack Obama into the skipped category. There is no particular order here. It is just the order in which I found them in this list. That is not a judgment of their presidencies in any shape, way, or form. We are specifically not rating their presidencies because they have not been in office, out of office long enough, and this guy literally could not do anything aside from give an inaugural address before he died. So,
And it was a mediocre one at that.
from all primary sources, yeah, he's kind of mediocre. Anyways, our next friend up is Rutherford B. Hayes. He's lucky we're just judging presidencies because his initial candidacy is rife with controversy to the point where he has been nicknamed Rutherfraud. Like he's one of the first presidents accused of stealing an election, and there being actual evidence to support that. But anyways, on to judging his presidency, not judging his campaign because that was before he was president. An incumbent campaign misstep, now that's different. But anyways, served as a Republican president from 1877 to 1881. He immediately succeeded Ulysses S. Grant. So, positives. He is the first president since Andrew Jackson's spoils system was initiated. He tried to eliminate it. He made actual strides towards trying to eliminate it. This brought him severe animosity even within his own party. For those of you who are not familiar with this aspect of American political history, there were two schools of thought. There was the merit system, which was initially thought of by Andrew Jackson, whom we'll get to in a minute. Actually, next, after Rutherford B. Hayes is done. Anyways, in which a person should be appointed to federal office by the president purely based on the merits of their abilities to do the job. All for that. However, and we'll get to this more with Jackson in a minute, he also inadvertently created the spoils system in that he thought his judgment was better than everybody else's and eventually was just appointing people based on their political connections and whether or not they agreed with him. This led to the spoils system, which stayed in place all the way into Hayes' presidency and is still a problem we face today. So, anyways, Rutherford B. Hayes was the first president to actually try and attack the spoils system. He wrote an executive order that forbade the requirement of federal office holders to make campaign contributions or participate in partisan politics, meaning that it could not be a requirement of holding federal office that you contribute to any one political party. You could not force campaign contributions from federal office holders.
That seems so weird today that you could like straight up force someone, like if you don't donate X number of dollars, then you will lose your appointed position.
That happened a lot in the 19th century. Even Lincoln was guilty of that a time or two.
Not surprising, honestly.
Yeah, but anyways, he also vetoed the first attempt at the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1879.
Okay.
So, like, to me, yeah, big positive. Um, really, no net negatives. I mean, like, he had a personal philosophy that I disagree with. He was an assimilationist towards Native Americans, believing that they should be integrated into white society, whether they wanted to be or not. However, at no point did he try to pass legislation or encourage legislation to further that philosophy. And so while I see it as a negative with his own personal philosophy, as president, he did not take any actions that I could find that furthered that philosophy.
Yeah, and assimilation is such a. I mean, I already started the sentence and I have to finish it. Otherwise, it's going to sound weird. But there's two kind of schools of thought when it comes to assimilation. The idea that people who are striving to be accepted within society have to assimilate to become part of that society.
Mm-hmm.
That is a very dangerous idea because
Yes.
you're essentially deciding what the majority
You're effectively
culture is, and then
exactly
wanting people to conform to that.
right. You're
The
effectively forcing conformity to a particular cultural ideal.
There is another idea which is commonly used, and it is not exactly assimilation, but it's the idea that there's this kind of American culture that is not specifically any ethnicity or historical culture or anything like that. It's just the idea of what it means to be an American. And I think that a lot of people who are like, yeah, we should try to be part of American society, but they don't want to pass bills or change anything or force people to do anything different about their life.
Right.
That's probably the credo that they follow.
Right. I'm very much in a favor of, like, when you look at the culture of the United States, I'm very much in favor of looking at it as, you know, in contrast to the Great American Melting Pot, as a lot of people refer to it as all
Yeah.
things melt together to become one thing. I vehemently disagree with that. I would say if we're going to use the soup or fondue analogy that seems to be going on there, I would say it's like it's the American stew. You know,
Yeah.
there is the broth of the overarching kind of nebulous American culture, of freedom and self governance and self reliance that engulfs us all. But then there's the individual pieces of cultures from all over the world that are part of what make that freedom, that broth of freedom, so to speak, actually mean something.
Yeah, I mean, it's in at the worst, at the absolute worst, I'd like to see America as like Golden Corral. Like
Oh,
we have
God.
a variety of everything from everywhere.
Yeah,
It's
but it's
just
all
kind of a
mediocre and terrible because it's Golden Corral. Like at
it's the
least, at
mediocre
least,
version of
at
everything.
least, at least go some, at least aim high like Fogo de Chao or something like that. Jeez,
But that doesn't have as much variety.
are you kidding me? There's like 80 different kinds of meat. Okay,
Well,
okay,
next time,
okay. So it's not so great if you're a vegetarian or a vegan. Okay, fine. I'll grant that. But they do have unlimited sides there. I think, from what I've heard. Uh, I've I've not been. I've been like one time in the last couple of like 15 years or so. So I don't know what it's like now. But like when I went, like there was so many different kinds of like grilled stewed and like meats on a sword and all that kind of stuff. It was really cool. And and then like there was unlimited sides. You had rolls, you had potatoes, there's green beans. It was pretty good.
in our next video, we'll be ranking presidents completely based upon their dietary choices.
Oh my gosh, that'd be, dude, that's gonna be so difficult, especially digging up primary sources on like literally everyone, uh, like everyone like pre, I don't know, Millard Fillmore is gonna be a nightmare.
Donald Trump will be at the very bottom because he eats ketchup on steak.
Oh god, no, just absolutely not. Instant F tier for that alone. Instant F tier. No, no, no. Actually, for that one, he belongs in Buchanan's hell tier for putting ketchup on steak. I bet the I bet the I bet the Cheeto even eats it well done. Anyways, back to talking about Rutherford B. Hayes. No real net negatives. Like I said, he had an assimilationist philosophy that was geared more towards like forcing assimilation, but he never actually took any political or legislative steps towards that end. And everything else that I found, were pretty positive. Not like super duper positive, but nothing really negative. So like I kind of see him as like a high C tier, maybe a B tier.
Nah, I got no feelings.
No feelings?
No feelings.
Not based on anything that I said.
Nah, just,
Come on, participate, Harry.
I mean,
I'm gonna start calling you
I don't
John.
really know.
I'm gonna start calling you John Kerry for being wishy washy and flip floppity.
I'm not flip flopping. I don't have any opinion. There's a difference.
Yeah. The point is to
What's
have
the step below wishy washy to where it's like you don't even like just pure apathy?
a wet lump of cardboard that's been left out in the sun and smells weird.
Yeah.
Stop being that. Be better than that, Harry. I know you can.
We'll go with a high C. Sure, that works.
A high
it's
C?
A drink.
Okay. Better or worse than Eisenhower? You know
I'd
what?
say.
Eisenhower did a lot of good things that still have impacts today. Most of what Rutherford stuff did really didn't have a long lasting impact.
Who's to the right of him?
Gerald Ford.
Yeah, that's a good place for him.
Okay. All right, so we're done with Rutherford. Let's move on to Andrew Jackson. Positives. He actually brought into being the merit system, but also a big negative of that is he inadvertently created the spoils system because he kind of went crazy.
So that's not. It's not even a positive that he brought it in. He spoke about the merit system, but then didn't even do it.
Exactly. Well, no. Okay, so his initial appointments to federal offices did follow the did follow meritocratic principles. It was about halfway into his term that he went off the deep end. So anyway, Andrew Jackson, Democrat, 1829 to 1837. He sought
First Democrat president, right?
I think so. He sought initially to purge corruption in the federal government. Like, he actually launched active presidential investigations into multiple cabinet positions and offices, found corruption, and got rid of those people. Like, there was actual evidence of corruption, and he did do that. That was a positive thing. That was pretty much that was most of his first term.
Okay.
Here's where we get into the bad stuff. Despite his believing in the merit system, of course, he consistently used his presidential power to promote friends and cronies of his in the Democratic Party into positions of federal power. So this established what we now know as the spoils system. He was an extreme expansionist. He was all about westward expansion. And because of that, he's the dude that kicked off the Trail of Tears in the 1830s. Yep. Like, Trail of Tears alone, instant D tier. Actually, I'm tempted to put him in F.
Because of everything that Trail of Tears basically created for the next century.
Yeah.
Kind of been put you in an F.
Not even the next century. He was the president in 1829. This kicked off in like 1830, 1831. So in less than 10 years, this will be 2 centuries of flagrant government oppression of the Native Americans, American people. It is a wildly undercovered and unspoken atrocity. Like, people know about it, but nobody wants to do anything.
Yeah.
People want to talk about reparations for things, and without getting too deep into that, if anybody deserves reparations, it's the Native American community, hands down.
It's also one of those things where at this point, like, just how do you even start? You know,
Yeah. How do you start besides just throwing money at it and hoping it works?
like
But that's not an excuse to not do anything.
the only thing that could kind of be a step forward was I was going to say the Supreme Court case from a few years back where it kind of recognized that essentially half of Oklahoma is
Is First
actually not a
Nations.
state. Yeah, it's
Yeah. It belongs
but
to First Nations.
yeah,
I would say at this point, yeah, like we might need to start handing states off if they don't want to be part. If they don't want to be part of the United States, which who could blame them for not wanting to be, based on how this country has treated them for two. For like okay, so just Jackson's policies, that's 200 years right there. But overall colonial policies and imperialistic actions taken against them, that goes back 500 years now, almost.
yeah.
Like, so who could blame them for not wanting anything to do with the United States at that point? I mean, like, we pretty much owe them, at minimum, like Colorado, Kansas, Wyoming.
That's a good topic for another discussion to kind of look at
Yeah,
the long history of legislation and
eh,
how what reversing that would even look like.
exactly. And like, what reversing could like, and what would the effects of that be? You know, at that point. But anyways, yeah. So, for me, man, Trail of Tears is absolutely terrible. Um, I'm gonna say he's in between Cleveland and Buchanan.
I mean, I know that this isn't really like a hard thing with policy that you can rule on or discuss one way or the other, but I just know that there's so many um, primary sources and secondary sources from the time that essentially said that his leadership style was massively based on intimidation and just being overall toxic, and that did kind
Yeah,
of pave a way for that kind of leadership in government, which
yeah, but he was not the first one to do that.
he wasn't.
We're actually about to run into at least one that was a pretty prominent combative president.
Yeah,
Very not well liked at all. Um, but yeah, like
I think F tier is probably good.
F tier is good.
Yeah,
I don't think he's. Basically, I think both he and Buchanan are like, to quote Arlie Ermy, they are both equally worthless.
yeah.
And I know like there'll be some dieharders of Andrew Jackson be like, oh, but he ran a budgetary surplus. There was no national debt under his presidency, and that's the only time we never had a national debt. Okay, whoop-de-doo. I'm sorry, that pales in comparison to being complicit in the starting of a government policy that displaced and resulted in the deaths and oppression of hundreds of thousands of people.
And also to give someone the credit for not having a budgetary deficit when the country had only been established for like 50 something years,
not
and
even
then
not even
B,
50.
other presidents before him had substantially made course corrections to get to that. And then
Uh-huh.
C, you're dealing with the spoils of war. Like we just came out of a war where we got a lot of territory and a lot of resources and a lot of money from our friends.
Exactly. So, yeah. Anyways, moving right along. Our good buddy Thomas Jefferson.
D.
We're not gonna be talking about any of his personal flaws, how he treated, how about the fact that he owned slaves and things like that. Those are things that are outside of his term as president. Those are personal problems. So those will not be factored in here. If we start grading presidents, like if we start doing like deep dives into individual presidents and episodes on them specifically, okay, yeah, that'll be a big topic there. But we're just judging presidencies again. Just like with Jimmy Carter, he was a bad president, but he's a great guy. Jefferson, good president, not such a great guy. So this will result in a bit of disparity here, unfortunately. So Thomas Jefferson, uh, first Secretary of State, VP number 2, Pres number 3. But we're only talking about the fact that he's Pres number 3. President from 1801 to 1809, a member of the Democratic Republican Party. As oxymoronic as that sounds today, that was not very far-fetched back then. So, um, he shrank the national debt on pretty much on his own through his own policies by nearly $30 million by the end of his second term. And now that doesn't sound like a lot, because today, in today's dollars, that'd be about 500 million, give or take.
No,
Yeah,
that's got to be way more. You said 33 million?
30 million, and
30 million?
that translates to, in 2021 dollars, which is where the most recent information is from, is about 500 million. Yeah.
That's got to be. It feels like it's way more than that.
No, that's using a historic inflation calculator. That's actually, like, I think it was like sponsored by Cornell.
So that means that the most inflation we've seen has been like from like 1930 to now.
Yeah, a lot. The vast majority of our inflation happened then.
That's
Remember it.
awful.
Remember it wasn't until FDR that we were completely pulled off of the bimetallism standard.
All right, we'll get to that in a bit.
So, anyways, now here's the kicker, though. That's not a big difference. 30 million, 500 million. Okay, it seems like it should be more, but it's not. However, during Jefferson's presidency, that $30 million was a 36% reduction in national debt. That was massive. A $500 million reduction in debt today would be about 1.6%.
Man.
Yeah. So it's not so much the amount, it's the percent of national debt that he managed to cut in one term. He cut it by nearly 40%. No other president has ever done anywhere close to that. But if we were to do that exact same thing today, amount-wise, yeah, less than 2%.
Okay, so the equivalent of what he did, if we were to put it in today, is like, what's the national deficit at debt right now?
Like 30.5 trillion.
So that'd be
half of that,
essentially like,
so half of that would
Biden
be
ends
so
his
half of that would
term.
be 15.75. That would be if Biden, in this term, or if he ends up being a two-term president, in his second term, if he manages to reduce the national debt by roughly $14.5 trillion. That's what it would take now to achieve what Jefferson pulled off in his second term.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's like, again, he was not a good person, but he was a amazing leader in those terms. As far as economic policy, he was an absolute monster. And I mean that in a good way. So he pardoned several people who were prosecuted and imprisoned under the Alien and Sedition Acts. We'll talk about more of that with the next person. He repealed the Judiciary Act of 1801, which eliminated the vast majority of John Adams's midnight judges, basically a early colonial, an early American version of the secret FISA courts today. And he founded West Point. I don't know if that's really a positive one way or the other, but like, it's one of the longest standing educational institutions in the country.
I'd say it's a positive.
Yeah, like, in that regard, it's a positive. Like, it's a lasting mark on history that still has an effect today. That's the only reason why it's there. Now here we go for the negatives. Again, firm believer of assimilation, forced assimilation for Native Americans, and failing that, displacement and drive them westward. Now, no policies were put into place that encourage that, really, aside
On
from
the federal level.
on the federal level. Yes. Now, with the Louisiana Purchase, okay, like, there was a ton of media that came out encouraging movement out west, encouraging moving into the Louisiana territories. uh, but no actual federal legislation that came out promoting it. And so that's why I'm not grading it as a monstrous negative like I did for Jackson.
Yeah.
He was an extreme isolationist. Wanted nothing to do with world affairs. Didn't even want to trade with other countries. And in fact, his economic isolationism um, was in his first term started to lead towards a bit of a financial crisis, but he rescinded that in his second term. So he came around, but he started out as an extreme isolationist. And then he realized that, oh, yeah, you kind of can't do that. And here's kind of a bad thing, though. He did attempt, because he was friends with Alexander Hamilton despite their spats, he attempted to influence the verdict of the treason trial of Aaron Burr,
Mm.
saying that before it even started, saying that his guilt was overwhelmingly confirmed and there was not even a need to hold a trial. He should just be convicted. And so to me, that's an abuse of power. Um, but it gets a little bit worse because then he made the first argument for executive privilege when he was subpoenaed by Burr's legal team for testimony. So he tries to influence the outcome of the case before it goes to trial. And then when he would have actually had a legitimate impact on the case, he cried executive privilege. That's kind of a lousy thing to do.
Yeah.
So overall, though, despite those two kind of constitutional problems, I would rate Jefferson as the highest B tier, possibly A tier.
What about, so are we factoring in Coast Guard?
Um, I don't know. Explain.
Wasn't the Coast Guard founded under him?
I don't think so. I think Coast Guard was 1775.
There's something about the military. I can't remember if it was the Coast Guard was founded or if everything was basically dissolved except for the Navy.
I think that happened under Madison.
To the computer webs.
Nah, we're not gonna bother with it unless you just want to.
I'm going to.
Oh, no, 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 no! Don't do your camera like that. Hang on, hang
Okay.
on, because we've got good video going right now. I grabbed my phone. Um, okay, Jefferson, the Coast Guard. So yeah, the Coast Guard was invented in 1790 by Alexander Hamilton.
Okay.
And I know the Navy, like the Navy was officially established, like officially recognized under Madison. That I do know. He's called the father of the U.S. Navy.
Yeah. So I'm thinking that what it was is that he pulled back on all the other
I think,
military.
yeah, I think so. He did not want to become, he did not want the United States to become a massive military power,
Yeah.
which I'm kind of in agreement with. Like I don't even really agree with the fact that as of right now, the United States has kind of become the gun pointed at the head of the world, and we have been for almost a century, over a
Yeah.
century if you factor in World War I. So Jefferson, like I said, I'd say high B tier, low A tier. What do you think?
I'm thinking
Like he's definitely better than U.S. Grant. I'm sorry, he was a better leader than Ulysses Grant.
who's the highest B tier we have?
Grant.
I might kick him into A tier. I think it just might. The
Let's put.
only thing that is the executive privilege really that makes you a low A.
Yeah, it's like
That brings you down.
right, but does that overwhelmingly negate the near 40% reduction in national debt in a single term.
I think we can probably be okay with a low A.
A low A? Okay.
Because so many other people have used executive privilege that,
In far worse ways than he ever did. But
yeah,
granted, he was the first. He started the tradition of executive privilege.
yeah,
So, but there again, that was based on an interpretation of the Constitution that has been upheld by the Supreme Court. So it's not
true.
just upheld because of what Jefferson did; it's been upheld as constitutionally justified. And so, while there have been malicious uses of it, I don't think it is Jefferson's fault that those malicious uses occurred.
Congratulations, Jefferson. You're our first A tier president.
Right? And you know what? I he's a decent A tier. He's a decent A tier, I think. Next up is our good buddy Pres number 2, John Adams. I'm not a big fan of his personally. Uh, the only Federalist president, served as president from 1797 to 1801, one term. Some positives. Oh, excuse me. Adams was the father of the U.S. Navy, not Madison. That's my fault. No real personal scandals while in office. Like, that was like every other president, there has been some like little piddly thing that has popped up about their personal life during their presidency. None of that ever happened with Adams. Aside from the fact that people just didn't like him. He was not well liked among his cabinet or among other leaders at the time. But that I don't see as a personal scandal. Now, I'm not really saying it's like a positive for him. It's just like kind of an interesting factoid. But anyways, he established. My gosh, he established the Library of Congress. Like that's a pretty interesting American institution right there.
Yeah, that's
And
pretty good. That's good.
he started our kind of lean towards non-interventionism because the war that broke out between Britain and France, he did everything he could to stay out of it.
Yeah,
Pretty positive thing. However, the negatives, we're getting into those. So in 1797, the XYZ affair. If you're not familiar with that, the X, Y, and Z are actual code names for 3 French emissaries who allegedly attempted to extract exorbitant bribes from U.S. negotiators to even meet with them. Adams did not handle that very well. There was the Quasi War in May of 1798 against a French privateer that they failed to capture.
Do we know which privateer?
I don't. I don't remember. And the direct tax of 1798, which was the direct cause of the Fries Rebellion, that required military intervention to stop. And of course, the Alien and Sedition Acts in 1798. These gave extreme powers to the president over deportation authority. There were specific targeting of French immigrants, increased citizenship requirements that were imposed almost entirely on French immigrants, and also made false, scandalous, and malicious writings against the government and or its officials illegal.
Yeah.
That was bad. I put him as a D tier. He's not as bad as Cleveland, Jackson, and Buchanan because these no good. I would put him. I don't know if I'd put him lower than Herbert Hoover.
Mm. Let's put him up there and see how it looks. Put him in front of Herbert. Yeah.
I mean, his tendencies weren't really ethno-nationalist. He just hated one particular country, France. So I'm kind of leaning towards, because that whole Chinese Exclusion Act was really bad.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, it's better to just hate one country instead of like a whole bunch of countries.
It's better to hate one country than an entire people,
Yeah,
regardless of what country they're from.
because
Like, like the
your
XYZ.
concern is not so much based on racism as it is national security. It's just effectively racist or nationalist.
Exactly. It's a nationalist policy, but not an overtly racist policy,
Yeah,
Like what Arthur did, and how Hoover behaved
yeah.
as an elected official. But I don't think he's better than Will. I don't think he's better than Fillmore.
Okay,
I think that's a pretty comfortable position for him personally.
that looks good. His little tiny head in between the two big ones.
Yeah, kind of. It's kind of funny. Anyways, it's a depth of field issue. Average height at the time, to use the Napoleon joke, because actually John Adams, if I remember right, was notoriously short. Anyways, anyways, uh, we're not gonna make Lollipop Guild jokes.
Even if he's got the wig.
Even man, he kind of does. I didn't even mean that at first, but man, damn, dude, that was. Whew. Anyways, our next friend on the list here,
Our next contender.
our next contender, yeah, is Andrew Johnson. Positives, basically none.
Yeah.
He served from 1865 after the assassination of President Lincoln until 1869, where he failed to even secure his own party's nomination, which
He got
caused.
primaried.
Oh, no! He was going to get primaried, so to avoid being primaried, he formed his own National Union Party and secured the nomination there, and lost the election.
Wow.
Yeah, to Ulysses S. Grant. So negatives. He vetoed the Civil Rights Act of 1866. He considered guaranteeing free black Americans the right to vote, quote, a delay and a distraction. He lied openly during a speech in front of the Lincoln Memorial and falsely accused people who had spoken against his policies and his behavior of plotting to assassinate him. And he was the first president that was actually impeached. Though he was never convicted, we've never actually had a conviction on impeachment. He did have the most. He was impeached on 11 separate articles of impeachment that resulted in 0 convictions somehow.
You know, his off the wall behavior about like if someone disagrees with me, they're literally trying to kill me. Like that just sounds like Twitter mentality today. Like
It kind
that
of
doesn't
does.
sound far fetched at all.
Words are literally violence.
Yeah, he's basically like just he was in the wrong century. Everything he's saying right now,
He should be a member of the Twitterati.
pretty much. Oh my gosh! And the fact that he took over after Lincoln.
Yeah.
Oh, this is. There's
I'm
so
not.
many things that are not meant for this video that we should say as a historical analysis is
So
predicting modern
I'm
times.
gonna put him at the bottom of D tier, and for the plain and simple fact that he didn't actually do anything at all. Like, yes, he vetoed the Civil Rights Act of 1866. Um,
His his redeeming quality that keeps him out of F tier is that he
he
did not stand in the way of the amendments that were being pushed through.
correct. He did not.
That he could have
He could
taken
have,
a lot of effort to stop the amendments
and
that,
he didn't. He
and he
just
didn't.
ignored it.
Yeah, he let it happen.
So, like, In all honesty, for that alone, I'd say that almost redeems him to C tier.
Nope.
No, definitely not. Like, he's not better than Bush or Clinton or Carter.
He definitely wanted those amendments to die, but he knew that it was what the people wanted, so he just
Yeah, yeah.
let it
So
happen.
he's below Hoover, but above Grover Cleveland.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah. Let's see who's next on the block here. Oh, oh man, I almost did something really wrong there.
Hmm.
I almost said heads up, it's JFK. I wasn't even thinking. I was not even thinking. It just
Oh, even who's that on the block was bad enough.
no, because there was no definitive block of where he was
He was
driving
driving
at.
around that particular block
Oh, come
in
on.
Dallas.
Jesus. Anyways, Democrat president served from 1961 to 1963. He managed probably the most favorable outcome of the Cuban Missile Crisis that we could have had.
I
It
don't
did
know.
not result in it did not result in nuclear annihilation, which with who
It
ran
did
against
lead
him in the
to a
19
massacre of people that trusted us, though.
Okay, so that's Bay of Pigs. We'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
The Cuban Missile Crisis is a separate thing.
Yes, they are.
They are they are two separate occurrences. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a net positive for Kennedy. I don't think anybody, I don't think any other person who could feasibly have been the president at that time could have done better in that situation because it showed that JFK learned from his encounter with Nikita Khrushchev in Vienna.
Yeah.
He learned how to deal with him being a bully. He got run over at the Vienna summit by Khrushchev because he underestimated him. Everybody underestimated Nikita Khrushchev. Everyone. But at the end of the day, he did come back. He did successfully negotiate a stand down and removal of Russian missiles from Cuban soil,
Yeah.
which Khrushchev was not inclined to do at that point. He created the Peace Corps. Peace Corps has done a lot of great stuff worldwide.
I mean, it takes all of the hippies and puts them somewhere else for a few years. And I
Wow.
have so much appreciation for that.
Wow. Okay. He continued, like, he was probably one of the strongest civil rights supporting presidents we ever had,
Yeah.
including direct intervention against George Wallace in Alabama, like the National Guard thing.
Yeah.
That was Kennedy. And also, he successfully negotiated the nuclear test ban treaty in 1963. Again, something that Khrushchev did not want to agree to. He managed to pull an agreement out of Khrushchev for that. It was finalized in October of '63. It was a month before he was assassinated. But that was a big success. So the Cuban Missile Crisis, net positive. Peace Corps, fairly positive. Kind of a mediocre positive thing. The civil rights support, that's big points in my book, especially standing up to Wallace, who had been running over politicians left, right, and center in his home state and
Yeah.
nationwide for years. And that nuclear test ban treaty, again, pulling an agreement banning nuclear weapon testing out of the Soviet premier who did not want to agree to it. Those are all big pluses. Now, here's where we get to the bad stuff, of which there's really only two. For me.
Okay.
The Bay of Pigs scandal and the failed Cuban invasion of 1961.
Yeah.
Big negative. And he allowed a blatant violation of the Treaty of 1794 with the Seneca Nation by refusing to intervene in the construction of the Kinzua Dam, which ended up flooding 10,000 acres of Seneca land and forcibly displaced the residents.
Yeah. That's pretty bad.
That's pretty bad.
That far into the 20th century, there's still actions.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's pretty bad. I would add a third in there. He really kind of brought back in to a degree that has been pretty predominant in American politics for the latter half of the 20th century with the cronyism. Like,
Oh, you talking about Camelot?
yeah, Camelot. That has been a very, very bad thing for America, and
Okay.
that started during his presidency.
I would say we already saw signs of it in Eisenhower's, but yeah, it did become very blatant
And I
under
guess
Kennedy.
specifically, I mean, is his creation of his family's position started in his presidency, because there had
Yes,
been like
yeah.
cronyism and nepotism going back,
Oh yeah,
but
but like
spe-
blatant nepotism. Yeah, okay. I agree with you there. The Kennedy dynasty at that point. Yeah. So
yes, the Kennedy dynasty up until the point of even like,
we still have issues with Kennedys
Schwarzenegger
today.
being governor
Yeah, exactly.
is
Like
part of that.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. For those that don't know, yes, Maria Shriver is a Kennedy, and yeah, the Governator is a direct result of Camelot. There you go. Now for that, I don't think that's enough to put him in D tier.
I don't think so.
I think he's better than Ford. He's better than Rutherford B. Hayes. I kind of want to put him in B tier. Like a lot of people would put him in A tier, and I think a lot of that has to do with what I would call assassination cred.
Yeah,
I think he belongs in B tier, and I think he's actually better than Calvin Coolidge.
in Cold War was, for all intents and purposes, in terms of presidential popularity, also essentially a war.
Yes, it
So like he
was.
also gets wartime presidency status because of that.
So so my only bone of contention here is whether or not to put him above or below Calvin Coolidge.
Where's Coolidge sitting?
He's the only other B tier candidate.
Let's scroll up so we can look at B, because I can't really see it that clearly.
I put Kennedy below Coolidge right here. So we got Jefferson, Grant, Coolidge, Kennedy. I'm just not sure whether I should put Kennedy before Coolidge or behind Coolidge.
I almost feel like he should be number one under C tier, but I'm okay with.
Yeah,
I
but see, but at that point, Coolidge's presidency is almost a nothing burger.
That's true.
Like, but he had no major scandals, only one really negative thing. But his positives were not to the did not have the same kind of impact of positivity that Kennedy's did.
Yeah.
And I think the
Who
good with
was?
I think the good with Kennedy far outweighs the bad.
Yeah. What are we? Where are we dealing with like 20th century technology and NASA and all that? Like, which
I'm
president did that really fall under? Because is that Kennedy?
okay. So the space program starts under Eisenhower, picks up a bit under Kennedy, but like going to the moon and all that happened under LBJ. That was Johnson.
Yeah, but who made the pledge?
Oh,
Someone made a pledge to put a man on the moon.
that was Kennedy. That
And
was
that's really when I feel like the we started getting vast expanses in technology
yeah, for
based.
especially for so in that case I would honestly say I would put him above Grant. I
I think we should leave him where he's at. He's earned his place in B.
okay,
I think that's
okay,
good.
okay. We'll leave him there. We'll leave him there. So after JFK is James A. Garfield, and Garfield, I think
Loved
is
lasagna.
oh okay. So I'm skipping Garfield. He was elected president as
Because
a
he was a
Republican.
cat.
No. So the reason why I'm skipping Garfield is he was elected as president under as a Republican in 1881, but he didn't really get to do anything because he was assassinated by Charles J. Guiteau
When you get assassinated.
like 6 months into his term.
Mm.
Like he passed no legislation during that time. he voiced no real opinions aside from his inaugural address. He hadn't really done anything. Um, and but yeah, no. Looking at this here with Garfield, like I said, elected in 1881, assassinated just a few months into his term by Charles J. Guiteau. I don't see a reason to really try to judge his presidency because nothing actually happened.
Right.
Okay, anyway, moving on. LBJ is up next. And this one's going to be kind of contentious because there's a lot of positives, but also a lot of negatives too. And I'm not entirely sure how bad or good. I'm not sure exactly to what extent the bad outweighs the good or good outweighs the bad, but we'll see. So LBJ, president 1963 to 1969, Democrat, was vice president under JFK, was inaugurated after JFK was assassinated. And getting into the positives, national endowments for the humanities and the arts. Not a big positive, but still a plus. The Revenue Act of 1964 and the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, I think were both net positives for the country overall because it did have a fairly demonstrable positive economic impact and did kind of help stave off the economic crisis that we suffered later on into the 70s. He vehemently denounced the KKK, even going against members of his own party that were still supporters, that had been supporters of his back, in years past. He also, most notably, signed into law the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and those are the two biggest positives for me on that one.
Right.
Do you disagree with any of those, or have anything to say about any of the
I
positives
think,
so far?
I mean, just the Civil Rights Act of '64, like that alone is such a huge step forward.
Yeah, that starts him in S tier for me. Like,
Yeah.
and so, but the thing is, there were some really bad things that happened under his administration that he was directly responsible for in a lot of ways. And so that's gonna drag him down. How much, though, I don't know.
LBJ is just really more of an annoying president for Republicans because of how much his legacy created the myth of the party swap. Like he did so many good things that Republicans have been championing for decades, and then because they took fruition under his presidency, like the Democrat Party was like, "Oh, yep, see, Democrats did it."
Yeah, well, that's something we can get into at a later video, and we can discuss
Yeah.
whether or not a party switch actually occurred. You know, whether Republicans still adhere to the mandate of republicanism as it was founded under, and what that means today. But we'll definitely do a video on that later on for sure.
Yeah.
Um, so here's the negatives: Gun Control Act of 1968,
Yep.
sweeping government overreach, unconstitutional, infringement on a guaranteed constitutional right. That never should have happened. And but it was able to be passed in the wake of the second Kennedy assassination, Robert Kennedy, by Sirhan Sirhan. Um, the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which we now know is a complete and utter fabrication. And we didn't learn just how fabricated or synthetic it was, to use one of Alex Jones's terms. Right.
We reach from all levels of sources here.
No, 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 no. Just for words, just for words. I would never use Alex Jones for a source for anything. Even if he's right, I probably wouldn't. Just there's so much fruit of the poison tree with that man. Like Sandy Hook alone, he's dodging court appearances with like shady doctor's notes. It's pretty pathetic.
But that is a good example of just how you really can't see the legacy of a president in true light until 30, 40, 50 years later.
Yeah, like and that's why I say it's a stretch for us to even start judging Bush and even Clinton in this regard,
Mm.
because even Clinton has only been out of office for 20 years.
Yeah.
And so I think, while it's okay to go ahead and rank them in this because it's a tier list on a YouTube video and it gets us more towards the current era, I feel very vindicated in just flatly refusing to even consider discussing Biden's presidency, Trump's presidency, or Obama's presidency in this respect,
Yeah.
just because there's not enough time. Um, and because of the Gulf of Tonkin incident, we entered into the Vietnam War. And this brings us full circle as to why I hammered so hard the point of pardoning draft dodgers during Vietnam.
Yeah.
Granted, I'm against the draft to begin with. I think the draft in and of itself is unconstitutional.
But the fact that the whole war was created on lies, they
Based on
were
a lie.
technically right to not want to participate in it
Yeah,
because it
they were
wasn't
right.
a legitimate thing.
Exactly. There was no, just like when enlistment in the military dropped after we invaded Iraq in 2003,
Yeah.
because it was flimsy at best, and now we know it was nonsense. We know it was a lie as to why we invaded Iraq. But anyways, and here's another big thing. He continued and encouraged the continued surveillance of MLK by the FBI.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big negative for me. Now,
See, that goes right against the whole passing the Civil Rights Act of '64. That's
and
why
the
there's
Voting Rights
criticism
Act. Yeah,
saying that he did it in duress. Like he didn't do it because he believed in it. He did it because he had to.
he did it because it was a Kennedy policy. Kennedy was pushing for it.
Yeah. The writing was
Like,
on the wall. If he didn't sign it, it was going to be trouble.
yeah. And so, but at the end of the day, he still signed it. He did not try to veto it. He did not try to block it.
Yeah. It's a
I,
super important thing. And don't get us wrong. Neither one
yeah.
of us have any problems with it. We absolutely love that it passed.
Oh,
But
for sure, without a doubt.
it's
And so I
it's
think,
I'm just arguing that he doesn't get credit to the 100% of
right?
him being
No,
the
no, no,
one
no.
that's like, yes, I'm
He
fighting
does.
for this.
Yeah, because of his actions that seem to run counter to the spirit of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, I have some problems with.
Yeah.
So in that regard, I believe he's A tier. I believe he's below Jefferson A tier.
Let's talk about social programs and how that effectively led to soft segregation in communities. I mean,
Oh yeah, nope, nope, nope. I had almost forgotten about soft seg. Yeah, and also the still long-lasting effect of we cannot get support for Vietnam veterans even today
yeah.
because of his phony war. Either bottom of B or the top of C.
Who's at the top of C right now?
Eisenhower. He's definitely better than Eisenhower. I would even say he's better than Coolidge. Like, honestly, I think he belongs between Kennedy and Coolidge. Yes, the things, but there again, like 58,000 American servicemen.
I would put him in C just because I mean, because I'm not going to give him credit for the Voting Rights Act and Civil Rights Act because I feel like he essentially had a political gun to his back while he was signing those.
True,
There wasn't anything he believed in.
but he also did publicly denounce the KKK and vehemently so. He was actually openly against the KKK.
And that would have been the end of the Klan involvement in politics, essentially. Like any, I don't want to say the word legitimate, but any involvement that where they actually had an ability
Then
to use influence.
being a Klan member no longer had power because of LBJ.
Yes.
That's a big positive. Like, and here's the thing though, while the Vietnam War was a phony war, I don't think LBJ bears all the responsibility for that.
He doesn't. Yeah.
I believe he was lied to by the intelligence community.
Yeah.
I believe he was fed phony information to justify going to war.
And I know you don't like getting into conspiracy theories, so I'm probably going to leave something out, but
Yeah, so we can discuss that off air, and maybe save it and do an episode on our favorite presidential conspiracy theories, maybe
yeah.
like our favorite political conspiracy theories. Um, and they're gonna have to be conspiracy theories. Like we've not been able to prove them true or false one way or the other.
Does a court ruling find a civil court ruling? Does that count as evidence,
I would
or is that
I would say that it would depend on the civil court ruling. Like I said, we'll discuss it off air.
okay?
Um, so while the Gulf of Tonkin incident was a lie, and so was the second one, and so the entire Vietnam War was a lie, and it cost 58,000 Americans their lives for no good reason. I don't think LBJ bears responsibility for that. I think that falls in the intelligence community, and I do believe that they fed false information to the president and to Congress to get that going. I really think so. Now that becomes a bit of a conspiracy theory to some people, but I don't actually believe that LBJ was fully complicit in that. And so that's why I kind of think he to some degree belongs in B tier. Because yes, while he may have had to some degree a political gun to his back with the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, number one, he still did sign them. He could have tried to pocket veto and make Congress override him because they were going to pass either way. He could have made the stand.
Yeah. I mean,
he's also the president by which we got increased funding to NASA and put people on the moon.
and that's one of the reasons I want to bring up under JFK is because I would attribute a lot of that more to Kennedy's pledge than
Yes, Kennedy pledged it, but Johnson didn't have to continue it.
he didn't. Yeah.
There was no pressure on him to continue it. Not really.
Well, there would have been it would have been losing one of the battles of the Cold War.
Exactly. But that was the only real pressure, was a culture war at that point. He really wouldn't have lost anything in the public eye because the public, while they thought it was cool and all, they wanted to see a man on the moon. They weren't like really pushing for it. And so yeah, like I think he does belong at least in B tier.
I mean, I would disagree, but yeah, you can
But
put him in B.
but the whole soft segregation thing is where I kind of
The soft segregation, and then you did bring up the continued monitoring of Martin Luther
MLK.
King,
Yeah.
but it wasn't just MLK. There were lots of civil rights activists during that time that the FBI
Were open
was
It was like an open secret they were monitoring. Yeah, MLK,
not only
Malcolm X,
monitoring,
Medgar Evers.
but harassing to the point of trying to have them trying to basically make them have mental issues, causing anxiety,
Yeah.
causing paranoia, intentionally calling their homes 30 or 100 times a day.
Right, but those were not done at the behest of Johnson. He did not. I don't think he directly encouraged harassment campaigns. I don't think he was. I don't think he was entirely aware.
Instructed the FBI to do it, and then the FBI conducted the harassment campaigns.
Yeah.
So that's where it's kind of he may not have said go harass the people, but he was saying
No.
monitor them, and then the directors and the people who were running the operation said monitoring is going to mean harass.
Right, but there again, we also have the issue of he completely gutted the political power of the KKK.
Yes, he did.
Like, that's a massive accomplishment. And he didn't do that with a political gun to his back. He actually did that with a political gun to his head, discouraging him from doing something like that.
That is true.
And so that's why, and that's what I think justifies the B tier above Coolidge.
but that for me is keeping him out of D tier.
I see what you're saying there. So why don't we compromise and just put him at the top of C?
I'm okay with that. Yeah.
See, we compromise here. We compromise. There were, don't get me wrong, there were a lot of bad things under him, I think, but I don't think he was complicit in all of them. I don't think he was directly responsible for a lot of it.
Yeah.
Anyways, moving on from LBJ. I can just see the top half of his face. I already know who that is. That is our friend, the Great Emancipator.
Yeet.
And so let's take a look at Lincoln. Republican president, served from 1861 to 1865, took us to the Civil War. So here's what I'm going to say right now. I think we're going to disagree on the habeas corpus thing.
Probably.
I'm not against his use of suspension of habeas corpus. That was a presidential power that was enshrined in the Constitution from the jump. And he conducted a legitimate use of that power. And then he rescinded that suspension as soon as the Treaty of Appomattox was signed.
Yeah.
So he followed it to the letter. He used his presidential powers as described in the Constitution. He did not abuse them. Whether now there may have been abuses that happened under the suspension of habeas corpus, but I don't think you can directly attribute those to Lincoln.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that you could because there's a whole war going on.
Exactly. So I mean, like he acted in good faith as president, I think.
I mean, knowing a lot about Abraham Lincoln, the term "good faith" is a very hard term to use.
It is. Honest Abe was a political gimmick, but he was a very shrewd politician.
Shrewd would be the perfect word to describe him. Like he played games like no other.
But and the thing is, therein lies the rub of, is there a teleological argument to be made here of did the ends justify the means?
And that's the thing about him is if any president was an example of the ends legitimately justifying some terrible means, then
it's Lincoln.
It's Lincoln. Like he did a bunch of things that, constitutionally speaking,
were questionable.
Awful.
Were at the very least questionable.
At the least questionable, and at the worst, just completely.
But here's the problem, though.
Not in accordance with how the Constitution was written. However, everything he did was absolutely necessary to keep the country alive.
Right, because you look at even still in the Union during the Civil War, he was actively campaigned against by members of his own party, by members of the opposition party, and they were engaging in horrendously fraudulent and politically underhanded tactics.
Yeah,
doing everything they could to slander the man and dismantle anything and everything they possibly could, to the point where he had generals in the Union Army that were actively working against him in office, that were in command of troops.
I mean, if anything would have gotten you shot as a traitor, like a general working to undermine the president.
Yeah.
But I guess, I would say he played dirty with the best of them.
He did. But here's the thing, though. He never got as dirty as they were.
Yeah.
He never actually sunk to their level. Did he do some shady things? Yes. He did some very constitutionally questionable things. However, they were for the right reasons. He did not go over the top. He did not abuse his power in anywhere near the capacity that other legislators were. And we got the 13th Amendment out of that. That right there.
Yeah.
The 13th Amendment alone puts him in S tier.
Yeah, I would say so.
Like, regardless of the questionable constitutionality of other actions, the 13th Amendment.
Yeah.
Like, if any president is deserving of being put in S tier out of all that we've graded so far, Lincoln hands down, I would say.
Yeah.
Okay, we got our first S tier. Next up is Benjamin Harrison.
You know what I'm going to say one last thing about Lincoln is that
Sure.
anything that he did for the that damaged his personal reputation was essentially a sacrifice for the good of the country.
I agree. Yes, without a doubt. He sacrificed his personal scruples to prevent the country from annihilating itself. Like, if you can say any president saved the country, it's Abraham Lincoln. And I don't think you can say that about any other president in here at all. All right, so Benjamin Harrison. So he was president as a Republican from 1889 to 1893. So right after, um, in between Grover Cleveland's two terms, and did a lot of really good things, I think. He enacted the Dependent and Disability Pension Act of 1890, which was the which number one, he had to dispose of a federal budget surplus, because at the time the way the legislation was written, that like they had to discharge the surplus somehow, and he found a way to do it in, I think, a noble and productive way, in that it provided pensions to disabled Civil War veterans.
Yeah.
He did attempt to initiate civil service reform, and this was despite extreme opposition. Again, this is the merit over the spoils system. He had to fight opposition within his own party to try and get rid of the spoils system as best he could. When it came to hiring federal employees, he vehemently pursued prosecutions of Southern violators of voting rights. I mean, that's a big positive there. And then the Land Revision Act of 1891. That was one of the first steps towards conservation in this country. Like, one of the first real steps. Like, okay, Grant, yes, he gave us Yellowstone in 1872. That's awesome. But that wasn't so much legislation as it was more executive action. Whereas this was a codified legislative measure towards preserving, the natural world in this country. Which, let's face it, even today, we've not done a whole hell of a lot to do anything for. We just keep screwing it up. But anyways, I digress. Negatives, he was an assimilationist towards Native Americans. And he had one of the highest tariff rates in American history.
We just really aren't finding very many presidents that were anti-assimilationist.
No, we really aren't. And here's the thing, not even in the 20th century, really.
Yeah.
Because remember, JFK, the Kinswa Dam. Like, how is that not to some degree an assimilationist move?
Yeah.
Anyways, so his negatives are pretty big negatives, but his assimilationism towards Native Americans did not, again, like Hayes, did not result in legislation in support of that. So, an egregious personal philosophy, but not one that really governed his presidency, I would say. And so I would say that kind of puts him, for me, in B tier, because you've got disabled veteran support, valiant attempts at civil service reform, steps towards conservationism, and actually prosecuting voting rights violators in the South.
Yeah, the actual prosecution of voting rights violators is a much bigger issue than a lot of people listening to the video are going to realize. Because,
especially in the late 19th century, before like right before turn of the century.
yeah, like we're talking about a quote unquote voting rights violator was a lynch mob that set up outside of a polling location. And if you
KKK,
didn't look,
full regalia, burning
yeah,
crosses in polling places.
and if you didn't look like you were going to vote for their candidate, then they would kill you on the spot, or they would shred your ballot after you voted and replace it with a fake one.
Yep. And so for me, like I say, that puts him in B tier. Um, I'd say like a singular point above JFK.
Yeah, that's a good use of the Department of Justice.
Yeah. So anyway, next up is going to be James Madison. One of my favorites, personally. Granted, he didn't have a great presidency, but he was one of the best founding fathers we had.
He's a very good political thinker.
Very much so. Very much so. So positives, you know, he finally court-martialed General James Wilkinson for his gross misconduct over his ties with Spain. Granted, the charges ultimately didn't go anywhere because the military court acquitted him in December of 1811. And Madison was a Democratic Republican president from 1809 to 1817, for those who don't know. So that's really the only positive I can find. I mean, we can get into the idea of, as president, he was very much in support of the Second Amendment in his letters of marque and reprisal uh, to ships saying, yes, you're absolutely allowed to own military grade hardware to defend yourself. I mean, so that's a pretty staunch codification there for me. But again, there's some of that happened while he was president. Other times that was prior to. Um, and then, of course, you have Marbury versus Madison, but that was before his presidency. So,
Yeah.
negatives, though. The rather poor management of the War of 1812, which resulted in a resounding loss for the United States. And then in 1809, this is probably the worst thing about his presidency, the Treaty of Fort Wayne, um, which essentially forcibly displaced members of the Shawnee Nation off of their land and gave them next to nothing in way of compensation. We don't have a good history of treating First Nations people well in this country.
Yeah.
And so for that, I put him in D tier. Like, he's not as bad as Arthur, Hoover, and Johnson. I'd say he's probably even better than John Adams because, at least Madison didn't pull the Alien and Sedition Acts nonsense.
Yeah. It's really astounding when you look at it in terms of the tier thing. The biggest thing that we're learning is how up until the later half of the 20th century, presidents either were like maliciously
ignorant.
Well, I was going to say maliciously antagonizing and just downright evil toward First Nations people, or were deafeningly quiet about the issue.
Yeah.
Like, no one actually stood up or was like, hey, maybe we're not doing the right thing, or maybe we should be fair.
And there was the notable outlier of Calvin Coolidge.
Yeah.
But that was it. For the entire first half of the 20th century, we had one president. One. That was outspokenly and publicly attempting to make up for the atrocities committed against First Nations peoples.
Yeah.
And we still haven't even had that since. Not really. Not really. Clinton, a little bit. a little.
Not so much from the executive. We've
No,
had it more in court cases and in
yes,
a little bit in
legislation,
legislative.
but
Yeah.
almost everything that's been pro First Nations in the since 1960, well, hell, since 1900, or really since the inception of this country, um, has happened entirely in the judiciary.
Yeah.
Anyways, on to the next victim, I suppose. William McKinley, Republican president from 1897 to 1901. One positive, one positive. He had an open door policy of trade with the Asian continent,
Hmm.
which was good because it ended the predatory trade deals that we had had with them, where we were basically exploiting the crap out of them. And it made
Yeah.
it more of an equal open trade. Now, here's where we get into some problems. Number one, the Spanish American War.
Okay.
The imperialist actions taken against the Philippines. Basically having a proxy, almost a proxy war over there. We show up like, hey, Spain, you shouldn't be doing that to the Philippines. We're going to kick your butts. And then we did the exact same thing Spain was doing to the Philippines, resulting in the Filipino rebellions.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was notoriously in favor of tariff hikes. And then, despite speaking out against lynching when he was a governor, he never took any action as president against the problem of racism. And so that's why it's not listed as a positive.
Yeah, because I know that
Because
I remember there are some misconceptions about McKinley.
mm-hmm.
Um,
So
and
it's like, yes, he was anti-racist, but he never did anything.
yeah, and judging by the time period of his presidency, I believe that
He
there
could.
also just wasn't going to be an opportunity for any legislative action to change on that.
I don't know because
But that doesn't excuse you from not saying something. You had
exactly.
plenty of opportunities to give speeches to try to you know, let your opinion be known.
He spoke with deafening silence.
Yeah. Now,
So
I do believe there was some situation where he had made some very public comments at the convention before he was nominated,
yeah, that
and
was that was when he was a governor. So that
and
doesn't
then
count.
right, it doesn't count, but it was a result of that convention that he basically was not able to say anything else while he was
Mm.
president. Something happened at the convention. I can't remember the history of it, but there was something that happened in the agree, and basically what had come to the conclusion was that he was not going to be able to say anything else about it.
Yeah. So in all, I'd say he has kind of a nothing burger of a presidency. I'm not going to put him in D tier, but I am going to put him at the bottom of C.
What about what was the land acquisition that happened under McKinley?
I That was Harding.
There was an acquisition that happened under McKinley, wasn't there?
Hang on, let me check. Let's take a look. Um, that was the annexation of the Republic of Hawaii.
During McKinley?
Yeah, in 1898.
Okay.
But that was after the Sanford Dole thing. McKinley didn't actually take steps to encourage that.
Okay.
Yeah, because the Dole overthrow of Queen Liliuokalani was 1896. And so that's why I kind of say, like, I put him below Harding because he's got kind of a nothing burger as a presidency. But ending extremely imperialistic and predatory trade deals with an entire continent,
Yeah.
that's a pretty big deal.
I guess I always keep thinking that he had something to do with Alaska because of Mount McKinley.
Oh, I mean that makes sense, but no, he did not. And keep in mind, like,
Your mistake
C,
is logical, Harry, but it is wrong nonetheless.
right, your mistake is logical, but wrong nonetheless. And keep in mind, like, C is like just average, fair to middling.
Yeah.
As like these, all of these presidents here have things that really do drag them down to D tier. I don't think any of that happened to McKinley. There are
Yeah.
bad things that happened, but not to the extent of even Bush.
That's fair.
And so that's why I think he belongs in C tier. He was middle of the road, didn't really do much, one way or the other. Next up is going to be James Monroe, I think. Oh yeah, that's Monroe. Um, so he was a Democratic Republican president from 1817 to 1825, and it's going to become clear where he belongs here shortly. The only positive I could think of under James Monroe, he had a geographically balanced cabinet. But that
For
was a
that
big
time
deal.
period, that's saying something.
But that was a big deal. And so, like, judging it historically at the time, that was a big deal. Now for the negatives. The Monroe Doctrine. Westward expansion.
Here's what I found.
That's already a net negative. The Missouri Compromise of 1820.
Yeah.
The fact that he even agreed to compromise was a problem. Extreme expansionist ideology.
Yeah.
Did not handle the panic of 1819 very well. That little economic panic we had then, did not handle that very well. And instigated attacks on the Seminole Nation to take the state of Florida. Yeah. I'm trying to decide if he's bad enough to be an F tier.
I mean, we don't have anything positive.
True, aside from that geographically balanced cabinet. Yeah. The question is he worse than Andrew Johnson? And I'd say yes, because Andrew Johnson, while he was impeached, he was a nothing burger. He didn't do anything. So the question is, he's not as bad as Andrew Jackson, because you do not get much worse than Trail of Tears when it comes to absolutely atrocious policies towards Native Americans and First Nations people. That's just, yeah.
I mean, at least we can say that he was equally represented. He had equal representation in his oppression.
Yeah, there we go. There we go. As if that's a positive thing, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, who's next? Oh, Tricky Dick. Richard Nixon. Republican
I feel
president.
like he's going to be in the low D's because I'm sure there's something good about him.
There are two very good things about him at least for the 60s and 70s. For the 60s and 70s, there's a couple of really good things. Republican president, 1969 to 1974. He did get us out of Vietnam.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big positive thing. He formed the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. At the time, it was a positive. It has grown into an unholy monstrosity since then, but that is not Nixon's fault.
Okay.
The vast expansions of the EPA, like the most grotesque ones, happened under a president that we are not grading today.
Yeah.
So, in large part, the EPA did do a lot of good things from Nixon's inception of it until at least the 90s. It did do good things.
Yeah.
and it secured with a notoriously difficult Soviet premier, Leonid Brezhnev, the anti-ballistic missile treaty. Like he pretty much wiped out almost an entire class of nuclear weapon. That's a pretty big deal. Now let's get into the negatives. Watergate. You know it, you love it, you love to hate it. The advocacy of the Southern strategy, racist dog whistling. Nixon did that a lot.
Yeah.
And that happened during his campaign in 1974 for president, so it counts as being part of his presidency.
And the thing is that he did it, other presidents have done it that we're not going to talk about, but the words and their actions didn't always mesh, and they had really, really terrible words, but they just never actually acted on it. Like, there's some absolutely, like, there are things that Nixon has been recorded saying that just makes you just cringe that he was ever president. But then it's like, but what did he actually do to enforce that?
Yeah, it didn't do much to enforce it, I will agree, but the fact that he said it to begin with is a bad thing. Remember, because now as an average person, okay, that wouldn't have a lot of impact. But this is
but when you're the leader of the country, you're setting an idea of what is the
words have weight. Words have weight, and the words of a president carry a lot more weight than others.
Yeah,
and so that's why I have that as such a strong negative for him. And then poor handling of Middle Eastern foreign policy, which led to the 1973 oil crisis.
Yeah.
Which then was made worse under Carter. And led to the violent overthrow of the Iranian progressive government.
Yeah.
And so Nixon kicked the tires on that one. And then Carter lit the fire.
Kick the tires, light the fire.
Took you a second, but you got there.
I just don't know what kind of car you plan on driving, but...
What's that?
I don't know what kind of car Ghost Rider is driving, but...
Gosh. Anyways, so because of that, we've got two really good positives and three really strong negatives. I'd say that puts him in D tier. I don't even say that puts him at the bottom of D tier.
It doesn't.
Like, I honestly put him ahead of Taft, but behind Jimmy.
I might put him ahead of Jimmy.
Yeah, that super fun thing is really, really bad.
Yeah, he's definitely right behind. He's definitely below Clinton.
Oh, for sure below Clinton.
But the thing is, there's just not a whole lot of difference in the bad things about them between the two of them.
So here's why I rate him below Jimmy Carter.
Because they're both lying under oath.
Right. Carter didn't lie under oath. Carter didn't lie to the American people. He just didn't do a good job as president.
Yeah.
Whereas Nixon lied to the American people, lied to Congress, and then tried to claim executive privilege, saying that he was allowed to commit a crime because he was the president. That's why I say that puts him below Carter. So, what are you thinking?
It's kind of, I don't care one way or the other.
Okay, we'll tell you what. I'll put him behind Carter to make myself feel better, but we'll call it a tie.
Okay.
How does that sound?
That sounds good.
That's our compromise there.
Yeah. Probably a terrible human being, but
definitely.
We've done worse.
We've done worse. We've done way worse. So now let's talk about we've discussed the son. Now it's time to discuss the father.
All right.
George H.W. Bush, Republican president from 1989 to 1993, former vice president under Ronald Reagan, had some pretty good positives to him. He had a lot of positives. NAFTA. Yes, Clinton is the one who passed it, but Bush, GHW, did a lot of the legwork towards getting it passed. And so it was passed kind of as a legacy bill. The American Disability Act of 1990.
Yeah.
Which actually finally included disabled individuals who technically under the law did not receive any of the protections afforded to other people under the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
And as someone who does like management, multiple years of management, that law has helped so much, because without that, people don't even know how to have a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And now that there's a law, it's like, oh, okay, well, it's very clear what we need to do in this situation, and then we can just get things taken care of.
Yep. He made in 1990 the Oil Pollution Act, which was the actual first update to the Clean Air Act since it was signed into law in 1977. He actually started the Daily Point of Light. He's the president that started under. The Daily Point of Light Award. And that still carries on today. Even Biden does it.
I know his whole like charity Points of Light, 1,000 Points of Light.
1,000 Points of Light, yep.
Yeah.
OBRA in 1990 was good. That Omnibus Reform Act was actually pretty good. And of course, the Ryan White Care Act of 1990. He addressed the problems of Reagan not addressing the AIDS epidemic. And the CARE Act in 1990 under G.H.W. Bush is to date still the largest HIV and AIDS sufferers assistance fund that was ever federally funded. That happened under Bush. There have been expansions, since then. There have been billions of dollars spent since then. But as far as federal recognition of the AIDS epidemic, only one that really took any real action was Bush.
Yeah.
Now we get to the negatives. Gulf War. That was a big bad.
Yeah.
There was no reason for us intervening in Kuwait. There wasn't. What are you doing?
Let me mute real quick.
Okay.
All right, I'm back.
Okay. The invasion of Panama in '89 under Operation Just Cause.
Okay.
Because there's still the running joke. Operation Just Cause was just cause.
Yeah.
And then the whole Chicken Kiev speech in '91. I mean, come on. That was bad.
Oh. What? Please refresh our minds.
Okay. I will have to pull it back up, but give me a minute.
While you're doing that, throwing up on the Prime Minister of Japan.
Oh?
You remember about that one?
Yeah, that was a faux pas. That's not really
one of the weird things, and this, I'm not saying that this is something against him, but just that let it be known this is something that kind of started there, is whether you want to call it a conspiracy theory or a political talking point, the right wing movement really started talking more about the questionable involvement in other countries based upon some of the things you were talking about. But also he had used the term New World Order in one of his speeches, and that soundbite was clipped and used, and
so much.
there was just the question about like, wait, are we fighting these wars because we actually have a reason to be there, or is it because we're just there for like economic interest for other
Mm-hmm.
like
So
allies, or what's going on?
right, so okay, so the Chicken Kiev speech, basically the Chicken Kiev mockery of the dish of the same name, which Chicken Kiev is actually pretty tasty. Um, but it was calling Bush a chicken because his last stop in a five republic tour of the Eastern Bloc as the Soviet uh, empire was starting to crumble in 91 was in Kiev, Ukraine, in which he delivered a very lackluster speech that essentially showed zero support for the people of Kiev, for the people of Ukraine, and essentially did everything to duck and dodge acknowledging them as their own country.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's not like we're dealing with any lasting effects of that.
No, not at all. I wonder. That's not topical to today's issues at all. Like I said, pretty bad. Chicken Kiev was a bad thing.
Yeah.
So, he did do a lot of really, really good stuff. Is he A tier? No. Is he
And
B?
in our
I
our
honestly
new
would put him in C. I would honestly put him in C tier, even with the LA riots issue.
yeah. Well, I mean, he didn't have anything really to do with that.
No, but he did send in the National Guard. But at the same time, there were actually like violent destruction of property, people being killed. Like you really have no option at that point. He had
If
to
he
do
didn't send
something.
in the National Guard, there were going to be people on the roofs of their buildings that were going to be killing other people. It was going to turn into like all out war.
Right, right, right.
But yeah, so Chicken Kiev, that brings us. So we're going to probably have a new channel where we talk about political dishes, and we'll make them for you on camera.
Oh Jesus! Wait till after I move. Wait till after I move. Just and then you know what? Yeah, sure. I've got a good iPhone 13 Pro Max. It's a good camera. Why not? I'll buy a like a lavalier mic or something, and we'll do something like that. That actually
Yeah, the
sounds
first episode we'll do a Chicken Kiev, and we'll also make the exact sandwich that Prince was eating before he shot the Archduke Ferdinand.
sure. Why not? Why not? Although to some extent that kind of thing is already kind of going on with people like Max Miller with Tasting History.
Shout
Fantastic.
out.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, that channel very much needs more shout outs. Like it's a great channel. If you have not watched it, you need to look it up. It's fantastic. Anyways, so Daddy Bush, I'm going to put him in C tier because like his bad stuff was pretty bad, but I don't think it completely undid all the good things.
I'm okay with that. I'd say pretty low C.
I was gonna put him above Gerald Ford and Hayes.
Okay.
I was gonna put like right here is where I was thinking.
Yeah, that works.
That works. Okay. All right. So Georgie, you tried, but you weren't as good as your dad. I'm sorry.
Well, and the dad has the benefit of being a one-term president. He
This
didn't
is
have
also
enough time to screw up.
this is also true. This is also true. And we're also judging him just for presidencies, not his actions as VP under Ronnie.
Yeah.
Anyways, who's next? Franklin Pierce. Oh boy.
We can finally see the light at the end of the tunnel of presidents.
And that's a very dim light at the very end. Like that's a very very dim light. You got one shining point of brilliance there at next to last, but then that last one, oh dang.
Yeah.
That's a bad, okay. So, Franklin Pierce, Democrat, 1853 to 1857. Positives, zero. Essentially nothing. Negatives, he caused bleeding Kansas.
Yeah.
The other big negative, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which sought to remove all of the protections against slavery creeping into the northern states from the Missouri Compromise of 1820.
Yeah.
F tier.
Who's he between?
Cleveland and James Monroe.
Okay.
Like, not as terrible as Jackson, not quite as terrible as Monroe. Kind of equally worthless
Yeah.
with Cleveland. Actually, no, no, he caused bleeding Kansas. He's worse than Cleveland.
Yeah.
Looks like Cleveland's running this show down here in F tier. Yes,
It's the Cleveland show.
that was deliberate. Next up is FDR, of whom I know you're not a fan.
Right?
But the thing is, he did do some good things. He did do
overrated wartime president.
Yeah, I mean, like, he had like 2 terms to screw up, and 2 terms.
3.
No, he technically was elected for a 4th term.
Yeah.
But then he died in office in 45, and we got Truman.
Yeah, I mean, but no other president had 3 terms.
That's true. Others had tried. But because of his presidency, we got the the 24th Amendment, the 2-term limit.
Yeah.
I think that's Amendment 24. Anyway, moving on. So you're gonna probably say this is a controversial take. I don't. I think this is an actual positive for him. The Social Security Act. I know you're gonna see that as a negative, but
it's huge negative.
But when you look at the Social Security Act as initially envisioned in 33 or 34, excuse me, there were so many more protections in place to stop Congress from stealing from it. And it did have more strictures based on level of income. It was initially designed as a Social Security measure as essentially a retirement package for low income people who would not otherwise be able to save up for retirement. At the onset, it was positive. It grew into a monster, but it was initially a positive. At the time, with the other options of leaders during FDR's administration, I don't think we could have had a better president take us through World War II. I don't think his Republican opposition at the time would have been a better choice.
Who was the opposition?
Let's see. I remember not thinking very highly of them.
I mean, isn't any of us are even going to remember anyone who wasn't president at that point?
Right. It was Wendell Willkie.
Oh, of course, Willkie. Like, I love that guy for whatever reason. That's right, because he's not FDR. That's why I love him.
Yeah, but anyways, like, you don't even know anything about Willkie. That's the thing.
Yeah, I know he wasn't FDR, that's for sure.
Yeah. So, but here's the thing. We did get one good thing. At least one really good thing, I think. Number one, the Housing Act of 1937 was an actual positive thing. You may know it better as the Wagner-Steagall Act.
Mm-hmm.
Provided assistance for low-income families, tried to improve living conditions. While it may not have been the best federal economic decision, it was the right decision to help low-income Americans at the time. Because remember, up to that point, we had Herbert Hoover, who ignored the fact that they were building shacks in the middle of parks, which were not any better than just living on the street.
I mean, I do want it to be known that the houses built from that act have effectively become like the most crime-ridden. Like,
that has been due to other policies, by
It
other
has,
presidents. That is, you cannot lay that at FDR's feet.
but the mass building of homes, like essentially assembly line homes, and then once the families living there move away, property investors buying them up and then leasing them and renting them out or reselling them, not being a part of that housing project, that has become a problem in a lot of areas.
Yes, that has become a very big problem in a lot of areas. However, that is not FDR's fault. I don't think. I would not say that, because remember, under the under the Housing Act of 1937, developers weren't allowed to come back in and buy them to turn around and lease and sell. That didn't
Yeah,
happen until the 50s and 60s.
which is only like 6 years later than he was president.
But nearly 20 years after the Housing Act passed in
Correct.
37.
Yeah.
Like, it did a lot of good during Roosevelt's presidency and continued to do good until other presidents and other legislators found ways to undercut it. That's not the fault of FDR.
Right.
The reason why I lay Superfund at the feet of Carter even today is because there have been no major changes to the Superfund law of 78. There were changes to the Housing Act of 1937 that turned it into the monster that it is now.
That's fair. The changes in Superfund have been because of lawsuits, not because of
Actual,
legislation.
precisely.
Yeah.
So that's why I say it's safe to throw Superfund at the feet of Carter, but not the problems with the Housing Act in the 50s and 60s at FDR's feet. It's just not viable to me. It's a very important distinction, I think. Now, some may argue it's a distinction without a difference, but I think that's very important.
What else do we have that's good about?
The Federal
Oh,
Labor Standards Act of 1938, the FLSA,
okay.
which fully outlawed child labor, required overtime pay for work exceeding 40 hours a week, and established a federal minimum wage.
I'm not sure I'd agree any of that's good. We need more child labor.
Harry, come on. You're not
No,
that.
seriously, like 16, 17-year-olds, why can't they work 40 hours a week if they want to?
They can if they're emancipated minors.
And if they're not, and they're still, like, let's say that they're homeschooled and they're still wanting to work 40 hours a week, or they're doing a work that is essentially an internship, then they still can't. Like, students who are 17 years old can't do a 40-hour a week internship that includes a full, well-rounded education.
Right. And they should be focused more on education than working. And so I'm sorry, I'm against you on that one. Um, Also, the good neighbor policy was a very big positive because he stopped American military interventionism in Latin America. That
Okay.
had been a big problem going all the way back to the late 19th century.
Yeah.
So those are really big positives for him. And then the negatives is, see, here's the thing though. I know you're going to bring up the New Deal, the first and second New Deal. I know you're going to bring it up. But here's the thing. We don't have any actual demonstrable evidence that indicate that those policies prolonged the effects of the Great Depression. There is a ton of colloquial statements or just like kind of ad hoc off the cuff statements that people say, "Oh yeah, his New Deal policies extended the Great Depression." There's no actual evidence of that.
I wasn't going to bring up New Deal at all.
Really? Okay, what you gonna bring up? Other than Japanese internment camps, because that was my next point, anyways.
I'll let you take that one.
I don't think there's anything else that needs to be said there. Japanese internment camps.
Yeah. That's pretty bad.
That's a big bad. That's a big bad.
I was going to bring up, so Social Security, anytime that you're talking about taking money from one person to send to another, that's not a retirement plan.
No, it was designed as assistance for low income earners in the country, like in the United States.
But it's also not a solvent issue. It's not a solvent policy. It's going to require exponential population growth. It's not well thought through. It was never going to last forever. And now we're getting to the point where we're paying for something that no one is ever actually going to be able to use the money they put into it. They're never going to get it back.
At this point, no, probably not. But that has been due to some wild abuses by later presidents and legislators that kept giving Congress the ability to do shady stuff with Social Security money. Oh, you can take from it, but you got to promise to pay it back.
And then they don't.
And then they don't. That's not Roosevelt's problem. That's not FDR.
Minimum wage is a problem
I disagree. Making
because you have lots of states that have a statewide minimum wage, and that makes sense for those states. But a federal minimum wage is essentially like price fixing the economy, and so that
no, it's telling companies that you have to pay your employees. Like you can't pay them nothing.
but employees can also just work somewhere else that will pay them more.
Not during that time, because remember
In the 40s?
this is coming up. Remember, this was Fair Labor Standards Act. The minimum wage was 1938, so we're not talking about the 40s yet. Prior to all of this, it was monopolies, coast to coast monopolies, from the 19th century, like from the Industrial Revolution up until that point. They were still dealing with monopoly problems. They were still dealing with, like with the aftermath of U.S. Steel, where workers were forced to work 12-hour days, 7 days a week, for next to no pay. And also, even during this time of the 30s, they had companies that were not paying their workers money. They were paying them in company chits to use at a commissary.
But we are dealing with a post Sinclair and a post Steinbeck time period. Like
On paper, yes, but in practice, those practices continued until the 1950s and 60s. Like U.S. Steel alone underwent so many additional lawsuits. Like
right.
like unions were in large part a good thing. Now, have some of them grown into grotesque monstrosities that are more um, geared towards organized crime than actual you know labor activism? Yes. But at this time in history, under FDR, no, they were very much for, like, it was very much a way to essentially try and end these predatory payment practices that businesses were using against people, against
So
their workers.
the question we essentially have on this is whether it was appropriate or a good idea for the federal government to mandate the negotiation of a minimum wage for workers.
I would say yes, because it was not happening at the state level except in very few places. And even then, that state level conversation was being dictated by those companies.
And I would say no, because once you've established that that is a role of the federal government, then what's keeping us from $15 an hour minimum wage, $20 an hour, $25 an hour every couple of years? And
But see, here's the
it's
problem
a
though. Now you're getting into the topic of inflation and this, that, and the other, and also into Reagan's voodoo economics and stuff like that. Okay, so see, I'm not pro socialism under any circumstance, but it's a very telling fact that whenever we have raises to minimum wage, inflation goes up, but there's no reason for it. Inflation goes up and the wealth gap grows. But when we put but when we pour money um, into companies, we just give them money like we have been for the last 50, 60 years. Inflation doesn't go up, but the economy doesn't get stimulated in any way, shape, or form. What happens? Bonuses for CEOs and company boards,
yeah.
upper echelon, upper management. That's where all that money goes. None of it goes back into the economy at all. It is entirely due to predatory conglomerate multinational corporations. Like, it's not a problem of capitalism. Capitalism at its core is a good thing, but capitalism does need to be regulated. And now at this point, we're not even in a truly capitalist economy or even a regulated capitalist economy. We are dealing with corporatism. That is the economy we live in now, is a corporatist economy.
And that's essentially what we got out of that exchange.
Except because he didn't go far enough. He didn't put regulations on businesses saying you're not allowed to just drastically inflate your prices.
To make a Upton Sinclair reference, he made the jungle palatable for your average American. That's all it did. Was
Yeah,
it made it? He added enough sugar to the poison to make it to where we could drink it.
he did, but that was all that Congress was going to allow him to do anyways. He wanted to do more. If you look at his original proposals in the first New Deal and like first drafts of it, he was calling for establishing a minimum wage that raised with the rate of inflation. And so the minimum wage raised as a consequence of inflation, meaning that the minimum wage cannot be driving inflation. It's not possible at that point. And then also establish, while some might have called it price fixing, I would disagree. It's not really price fixing. It basically anti-price gouging measures, preventing companies from grotesquely inflating the price of their products um, to try and maintain and grow profit margins. Because remember, what's considered a healthy profit margin on a business? What's considered an optimal profit margin on a business even today? It's about 20%. But with all this federal assistance going into corporate America, we've gone from 20% profit margins to places like Amazon logging 40 and 50% profit margins. And yet they dock pay on workers that go to the bathroom while on shift. Um, they spy on they spy on them. Like, it's ridiculous. And I think that speaks more towards an indictment of the crony capitalism that goes on these days and the corporatism versus anything like that. I don't while I think that could potentially be a starting point for the crony capitalism we see today, I don't really think it is, because we already had crony capitalism before that. It was
Yeah.
already a problem before FDR, and FDR was trying to take steps, but was hamstrung by Congress.
So that I think that point we've reached. I'll move on to the last point, which is that we only got into World War II as it was against FDR's wishes. Like, he did not want to. There was plenty of times when he could have showed strength and like
Yes,
done something when he was supposed to.
and then
But
Pearl
we
Harbor forced his
absolutely
hand.
waited to the last moment.
But see, here's the thing, though. He tried to be non-interventionist because we had a policy up to that point of being non-interventionist, and the last person to do that is still considered the worst president in all of American history. The last president to be a true interventionist in a global conflict is still regarded as the worst president in American history.
Yeah, it's
So, I mean, like, at the time, with the information available at the time, we have the benefit of looking back. Remember, hindsight's 2020. We have the benefit of historical hindsight here that was not available at the time. While we see opportunities for him to have shown strength, that's still judging it very much with a modern lens that I don't think is entirely fair. Like, I think we can judge people like Buchanan and Jackson and Monroe and Pierce for their flagrant racism, even though racism was acceptable at the time. It was already clearly known that it was a moral failing to be a racist
yeah.
and that slavery was bad. And so that's not a modern critique. That's very much an accurate historical critique. However, with FDR, I don't think it's really all that fair to judge him with that sweeping lens of historical hindsight. I don't think.
I mean, I think another thing is when you dive into where he came up with a lot of the ideas for his policies, these were the implementation of his policies were a direct result of influence from the intelligentsia, the literati of the past 20 or 30 years. This was a culmination of things that they were, here's the direction we want to move the country in. It wasn't like he just came in one day with New Deal 1 and New Deal 2 and he was like, all right,
No.
this is nice,
right.
this is nice.
Yeah.
This was think tanks from across the world that were like, this is the direction we want America as an experiment to move into. And
I think we're starting to delve into conspiracy theory territory there a little bit.
That probably would be something to discuss in another video,
Yeah,
but there's enough information. It's not really a conspiracy theory.
Okay, so at the very least, FDR, I'm saying, is a B.
A D?
A B.
We're just going to disagree on this. You can put him in B all you want. That's okay.
Well, I mean, like, we're trying to compromise here. Like, he did better than LBJ.
Did he?
For a wartime president with not a lot to work with and essentially, yeah, put overtime work on the table to actually make companies, compensate their people. Yeah, that's a pretty big deal.
I don't know how we're going to compromise because I'm going to have him at the last one on D.
I will compromise to the extent that I'll put him at the end of C.
Okay.
That's the bottom line.
I will accept that based on his pop cultural appeal.
Okay. Whatever. So next up is James K. Polk.
Only because of how much National Lampoon's picked on his wife.
Anyways, James K. Polk, Democrat, 1845 to 1849. The Rivers and Harbors Bill of 1846 was a net positive for him. And I guess the annexation of Texas. But that kind of gets undone by one of the big negatives of the Mexican-American War.
Yeah.
And then there's the complicated relations with Britain because the way the Oregon Territory was handled. Honestly, I'd say that puts him as a wash and puts him as a nothing burger. And so for that, average would be a C.
Okay. We've had a couple of nothing burgers in C.
I will even be nice and put him above FDR if that'll make you feel better.
It does.
It does make you feel better? Okay. Next up, John Quinn. Yep, that's Captain Sideburns. That's John Quincy Adams. That's Mr. Burns.
Excellent.
Democratic Republican from 1825 to 1829. Positives. One of the most balanced cabinets in American history. Which is a big deal for representation. The American system of domestic policy, which actually united the national economy. And then there were several successful national infrastructure projects, including the first passenger railroad in the United States, along with establishing equal reciprocity treaties between us and several nations.
Yeah, that's a pretty big deal.
And in fact, the first passenger railroad, the first passenger railroad in the United States. Even if you don't know, you know it.
Amtrak?
Nope. The full name of it is the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad.
The B&O Railroad.
Uh-huh. Yep. That is a real
So
thing.
it does not stand for the Body Odor Railroad.
It does not. That's why there's an ampersand in there. Here comes the negatives, though. This is where we start to get the establishment of very clearly defined political parties. This is where we break into Democrats and then Whigs and then Republicans. This is what effectively kickstarts bicameralism.
Bipartisanship.
Yeah, well, yeah, bipartisanship. Excuse me, bicameralism was Congress anyway. Yeah, this is he pretty much kickstarted bipartisanship. Um, Massive displacement of Native Americans through the westward expansion.
Yep.
And then the Tariff of 1828, also known as the Tariff of Abominations. I'd say that it kind of puts a wash on him to an extent because, like, his infrastructures, like, those were big infrastructure leaps forward.
Yeah.
Um, the reciprocity treaties, those were big things because those are things that had been attempted under Jefferson and attempted under prior presidents that people just were not able to achieve, but JQA pulled it off.
Yeah.
And so I think for that it washes most of the bad stuff, but that massive displacement of Native Americans with westward expansion, I'd say that firmly plants him in C tier.
Yeah, I'd say that's fair.
And I'm gonna put him below FDR.
Okay.
Well, below but equal to, because Japanese internment camps.
Yeah. I'd say that's fair because your love for Social Security and my love
it's
uh
it's not so much
for
it's not so much Social Security as it is the basically what started the Fair Labor Standards Act.
yeah, I was gonna say for
That's
non-military, my love for non-military diplomacy are probably like on equals.
yeah, I would say
Yeah.
so. So who's next after JQA? Oh, that's Ronnie.
As so many people say, the greatest president ever.
He was not. He was the great communicator. He he was probably the talkingest president we ever had, as far as being able to talk through things and actually be heard and get points across. I'll grant him that. And there
Yeah.
and there were some really good things that happened under Reagan. So Reagan, Republican, 1981 to 1989. Big positive. He actually took actions against apartheid-ridden South Africa with an arms embargo in '85.
E.
He successfully secured acquiescence and compliance to the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF Treaty, by Mikhail Gorbachev, which that was an actual accomplishment because he did wipe out an entire class of nuclear weapon with that treaty.
Yeah.
And another big positive, you know what? He appointed Sandra Day O'Connor to the Supreme Court. Like, that's a
Yeah.
pretty big time judicial appointment, I think.
Yeah.
But here's where things start to get bad. War on drugs, massive failure.
Was that him though?
Yes, that was him.
I.
He's the one that quite literally publicly declared this is a war on drugs.
But everything that was done was set up under Nixon, wasn't it?
No, not no. Mm-mm.
The
Like the
creation.
like the DEA was set up under Nixon and stuff like
Yeah.
that, but it didn't really get utilized until Reagan.
Because
Reagan,
he used the DEA as a way to stop crime when the cocaine epidemic was growing.
except he didn't do it in any effective way.
He did not do it in any effective way. No, no.
No, and plus,
Yeah.
like, okay, let's talk about Air America there for a minute, there, homie.
Did you just homie me?
I homied you, homie.
Okay.
Like, Air America, that was Reagan. That was Reagan and Reagan's CIA.
Okay.
So, okay, yeah, he literally he waged the war on drugs to seize cocaine, to sell back to people, to fund proxy wars. That's a bad thing. That is a very bad thing.
Yes.
And so that leads me into the next point, Iran Contra.
That's also the plot of a bad movie. A very bad movie.
Anyways, we're not going to get Iran Contra, the intervention in the Lebanese civil war in '83 We should not
Mm.
have had anything to do with that, but we sent
Yeah.
a whole bunch of Marines over and got a lot of them killed.
Yeah.
Um, let's see. Operation Urgent Fury and the invasion of Grenada in 1983. There was no reason for us to do that, but we did it anyway. If anything should have been called Operation Just Cuz, there you go. That Grenada would have been part of that. Let's see. Next up, severe mishandling of the AIDS epidemic to the point where he all but denied that it was a problem.
Is that really his
Yes.
thing though?
Yes.
That's
It was his
that
it was his public stance.
okay, but that is that something that you can blame him because we were all pretty ignorant. And by we, I wasn't even born then, but Americans were pretty ignorant of what was going on with AIDS. And you got certain people, like a certain doctor who's still very important, that was kind of denying it until the LGBT community told him, look, you got to get it together because you're killing us.
Yeah. But the thing is, he was a Reagan appointee.
He was. And I'm not going to say the name because I don't want
No,
the
no,
metrics to
I
get
know who
your
you're
video
talking about.
blocked.
I know who you're talking about. Yes, he was an AIDS denialist.
Yes, and that's the problem. I feel like if we do say his name,
We're
it's going to
not
be a
we're not
strike.
we're not go- Look, we're not here to talk about Tony today. And people can
But
take that
yeah,
however they
it's
want. But like again, that is still I'm sorry. That still falls back on Reagan. He was a Reagan appointee.
I mean you got to, and that's where it gets tricky on the
And he also
with,
just flatly ignored it, despite there being widespread media coverage of it from like 83 all the way through till the mid 90s.
okay, but he was trusting the science.
Let's not start that one.
That's what he was doing. The science was
Yes,
behind.
yeah, the science. Well, okay, so the government science was behind,
Yes, and he trusted
but
it.
studies at the level of the CDC, the Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins, he ignored those.
I will give you Mayo Clinic and Johns Hopkins. CDC was not on the same page.
Okay, CDC was on the same page, but massive studies by Johns Hopkins, big studies by Mayo
Yes,
Clinic, and he flatly ignored them. I'm sorry, AIDS epidemic falls at his feet.
which goes back to why I wasn't saying that NIH was a good thing.
Yeah, I'll grant you that. Well, it was a good thing, and then it became a propaganda machine.
And when you say
It
great,
was
you're not agreeing with me that it's a bad thing. You're saying that you understand where my point came from. Because
yes,
before,
I understand where your point came from. I
yeah,
think the NIH is misused. I do
yeah,
not think the NIH is a bad thing. I do believe that there have been steps taken to misuse and mishandle the NIH to turn it into a scientific propaganda machine.
yeah.
However, at its inception, the NIH was a good thing. It was not until later actions by other presidents that made it a bad thing.
I'm not gonna. I don't
But yeah,
think that in reviewing Reagan, I would hold him as complicit or in any regards to what was going on with HIV because
no,
as a political figure, he wouldn't.
he had two very good studies from the two most reputable medical studies organizations in the country, in the world, and he ignored them. That is his fault. He flatly ignored good science
And I'm
in favor of government science.
and I'm just going to put it out there. If there's something medical going on and you're telling me like this is not something to worry about, like, and for those of you who don't know, like, you know, you have some knowledge and expertise that I don't have. So if you were to tell me, oh, that's not something to worry about, or yeah, that's not a real thing, I'd be like, okay, well, he told me, like Drew said, it's cool, so whatever. I would just trust that you're right.
I mean, yeah, but you also know that I study this kind of stuff fairly extensively when I get bored.
Yeah.
And so it's like, and also, I guess when it comes to the history of things, I'm probably a bit better at it than you are because you are, at your core, a political scientist.
Yeah.
Whereas I do look at a lot of historical things. I am not a historian by any stretch of the imagination. No, I am an armchair historian right here, baby. Armchair, desk chair historian. I do not hold a degree in history, although I would go so far as to say that I could probably hold a conversation with the likes of Mr. Beat, who was a history teacher for over a decade. I could hold a conversation with vlogging through history and not be left in the dark on a lot of things. I think we could have productive conversations. So I think I could hold conversations with historians on certain topics like American history and a few, like a couple of minor aspects of world history, to the point where I feel that my information is pretty solid.
Yeah.
But anyways, I digress. Um, Trickle down economics. It didn't work. It didn't work, and all it did was widen the wealth gap in this country by a pretty severe amount. Like, there was a 10% increase in the wealth gap from 83 to 85 alone. Now, granted, that's gotten a lot worse in recent years, but under Reagan, that was like something like that had been unheard of at that point in time
Yeah.
since the reforms. And so, for me, that puts Reagan in C tier.
Um. So
And
the
also Star
actual
Wars. And also Star Wars. I mean, come on.
Star Wars is awesome, dude.
No,
It didn't get
no, I'm
executed, but
not
the
talking
idea
about the
was super
movie.
cool.
I am talking about
I
his
know.
policies and the fact that he grossly increased military spending while cutting actual, you know, useful social programs.
And I was talking about the actual missile defense program that never actually got implemented, but the idea
Uh-huh.
was pretty cool.
Okay, the idea was cool. It was poorly it was poorly thought out from the jump. The
So
concept was cool though.
there is a big thing on the table when we're talking about him that needs to be discussed. Your 2 cents on it, real quick.
Go for it.
Berlin.
Are you talking about the Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall thing?
I'm talking about the whole thing. I'm talking about because the wall
Oh,
actually fell in under Bush.
no, technically yes, yes.
Technically, it fell in, but all of the actual work and
Groundwork.
negotiation and
It started with
talking
Reagan.
about.
Well, see, for me, I that's encompassed in the Great Communicator for me.
Okay.
Like, I don't really have any more to say on that. Like, yes, he laid that groundwork for sure. But I lump that in with him being the great communicator because he was
Yeah.
one of the best presidents when it came to communication in general.
And the good and the bad of the East and the West Berlin and the airlifts. I know the Berlin airlifts, but I don't know if that was under his
That
presidency.
was
But like
not
that's
that wasn't under Reagan. That
yeah,
was
that's just
that was
a
Eisenhower.
huge topic that we hadn't talked about with any president yet. But yeah,
Yeah, no, I didn't want to get into the Berlin airlifts thing, because that was either Eisenhower or Kennedy, uh, because there was enough good stuff about Kennedy about one or the other already that it was kind of unnecessary, and we're trying to keep this trimmed down at least a little bit because we're already going to be this is already going to be 3 hours total at least.
yeah.
Anyways,
All right, so we're saying C.
I'm saying C.
I'm saying that's fair.
I'm saying middle of the pack C, like above Nixon. So slightly, well, nah.
Wait, you're putting him in D.
Oh, I am putting him in D. Excuse me, sorry. I'm gonna put him above Ford, about middle of the pack.
Okay.
That's where I'm gonna put him. Next up is Zachary Taylor.
Yee.
Yeah. So I'm actually gonna skip him. He was Whig WHIG president from 1849 to 1850. But here's the thing: he didn't do anything. He gave a couple of speeches, and then a year into office, he died of natural causes. Like, he just dropped dead.
Can we put him between Trump and Obama so we at least have like a sepia Big Mac going on.
Okay, fine.
Yay.
There we go. I mean, there's no order of or ranking here, but whatever. Anyways, like the only difference between Taylor and William Henry Harrison is Taylor survived a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Um. Okay, and let's see. We're gonna move on to the next president here, which is going to be Theodore Roosevelt.
S tier.
All right, so we're talking about Teddy Roosevelt. So I know you said S tier just a second ago, but
I was being facetious.
I know you were being facetious. I'm like, I don't think I agree with that. So, okay. Theodore Teddy Roosevelt, Republican president from 1901 to 1909. Remember, we're judging him just on his presidency because he would be F tier otherwise.
In your opinion?
In my opinion, yes. Well, low D tier. Low D tier. I'll be.
I can agree to that.
Because his split in the party vote in the 1912 election was pretty bad.
Yeah.
Anyways, positives. Trust buster. Used the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 the way it should have been used. He used it as it was intended. And while we may disagree with some of the action, with the overall philosophy behind it, maybe, it was something that needed to happen because it was essentially slave labor by another name.
Yeah, the way he used it made sense because that was a legitimate reason for the government to get involved, was when things were at that level.
Yep. So I mean, the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act of 1906, also net positives, I would say.
Again, those are things that nowadays are being abused and they're taking away people's choices and freedoms. But at the time, people were being frauded. They were literally eating lunch meat that had human percentages in it. Like,
yes.
Oh, this is only 2% people.
Exactly, because they were running the machines too fast and people were losing limbs.
And then they would feed it to other people.
Exactly. That's grotesque. That's disgusting. The Hepburn Act of 1906 was a good thing. It regulated the rates that could be charged for railroad commerce. And the reason why that was necessary was because railroad companies were charging exorbitant fees. They were basically trying to enrich themselves by undercutting everyone else. It was crony capitalism, and he was trying to stop it.
And there wasn't any competition at the time.
No, there was no competition.
You couldn't send it by air freight.
Right, or even by truck, because like the automobile hadn't been around but for a decade at this point.
Yeah. Our options were either Pony Express or
a train.
I don't think you could send it by ship at that point because I think the
Panama Canal had not been finished yet.
But even up and down the coast, had the act already been passed that prohibited
the Domestic Waters Act of no freight shipping in rivers and lakes and stuff like that, but like coastal shipping could still be done, but at that point that only benefited people on the coast. That did nothing for people in the Midwest or landlocked states. He was a lifetime conservationist. To me, that's a big positive. Like the National Park Service as envisioned under Teddy Roosevelt was an amazing thing. And I wish we would go back to that. The way NPS is managed nowadays is borderline atrocious, but under Teddy, the way it was initially envisioned is a fantastic thing. And it stayed that way for a long time.
Well, the thing is that might actually be a negative. Like, for the most part, I really do like the National Park Service, but I have learned and grown recently in my knowledge of how the National Park Service affected individuals and how eminent domain was used to separate people from their homes.
Okay, so
and realize that a lot of these national parks, that land that was on them was privately owned.
Okay, so yeah, I would disagree with the eminent domaining of stuff. Like for sure, I would disagree with that. So that may be something we dig into as like deep dives into presidents later on, I think. But anyways, he did help to effectively settle the coal strike of 1902. That was a big problem then
Yeah.
because like we were facing a coal shortage because of that. And he was able to effectively negotiate a settlement that actually benefited the coal workers. And he said he was there to get a square deal for all.
Yeah.
And he did. Like he was Mr. Square Deal. He did what he said he would do in regards to that. And he aggressively prosecuted corruption and misconduct in multiple federal offices. Like
Yep.
he was gung ho about that. He wanted corruption gone because there have been a lot of it from the Cleveland days and even the Harding days. Here's the big negative though. He was a big time interventionist and very jingoistic. While a lot of it may not have come to fruition, he he was always looking to fight somebody. He was always trying to like if he had been given the opportunity, I'm pretty sure he would have started World War One.
Wasn't he the only president that had a black belt in jiu-jitsu?
I don't know. I don't know. We'll have to look that up at some point. But still, that's not a positive or a negative for him. A cool factoid for sure. But like, yeah. I mean, so in large part on his presidency, for me, he's an A tier. I give him an A. Like he was better than Grant. He was definitely better than Grant.
If he wasn't such a war hawk, he could have been an S.
Yes, if he had not been so much of a war hawk, he would be for me he would be S tier.
Yeah.
But given his war hawkish nature, all of his policies were good, were fairly implemented. He didn't needlessly predate on any one faction. He really did seek to bring balance to the country. Like he was the great progressive.
Yeah.
So, do you agree with my A tier, or do you have some bones of contention in there?
No, I just think that the great progressive, a lot of people need to realize and think about when they talk about, progressives and conservatives, like when you
We're
talk
not.
about a progressive Republican, like Teddy Roosevelt's the blueprint on how to be both progressive and Republican.
Oh, for sure. And to do so well, to do so in a way that is beneficial to the country.
Yeah.
And I think like, and I'm sure people thought that I would have thrown him in S tier because of this right here. But I think his A tier is honestly well deserved. So moving on, let's see who is next. That's gonna be that's Harry S. Truman. Okay, Truman. So I'm gonna take a controversial take on this one because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people disagree with me. This is something I have as a positive. I think he made the right call to use the A bomb to end World War II, and I have justification to back that up because I actually did like two different research papers just on the decision to use the bombs.
Yeah.
And a lot of the primary sources at the time, as well as all the information coming to him out of out of what became the DoD, was indicating that it would cost us millions of lives on
On both
both
sides.
sides to take Japan. While I disagree with the long-term effects of the dropping of the A bomb, we had no idea it would do stuff like that.
I disagree with the indiscriminate use of force, which is exactly what we're trying to,
Get away
you
from.
know, yeah, it's what we have problems with right now with
Yeah,
the thermobaric weapons.
I disagree with the use of the bomb on Nagasaki.
Yeah.
Hiroshima, I believe, was justified in the sense that that was he was bombing a war material fabrication site. Nagasaki, on the other hand, if I remember correct, was mostly civilian, and that I have a problem with.
Yeah.
But at the same time, Japan forced it. Like, we bombed them with leaflets for months,
Yeah.
telling them, get out of here. Do not be here. This is something that we are being forced into by your government. You need to leave. Every measure that could have been taken was taken to save lives before the use of those devices. But the people listened to their leaders, saying they'll never do it. They don't have that. That's not a real thing. It's a lie. And then it happened. And now we have shadows burned into sidewalks.
Yeah.
And that is a terrible thing. It really is. It's a terrible thing.
I wouldn't say it's a
But
positive, but I wouldn't put it in a negative either. It's
no.
just a thing that happened. But
Yeah, well, and here's the thing where I think it becomes what I guess I would call a macabre or a brutal positive.
yeah,
It gave the world a taste of what nuclear warfare would be.
yeah,
And
we
it
knew
made
what.
and it made us gun shy through the entire Cold War.
Yeah,
And so the Cold War could have gone a lot worse.
yeah, it could have been pure mutually assured destruction if we didn't know what the results would have been.
Exactly. But and so this is where I say the use of the bombs to end World War II become kind of a brutal positive. And I don't mean it's positive in a good way. I mean, like, it was a net gain for the world as a whole to not be plunged into a nuclear winter and annihilated under the hellscape of nuclear fire.
Yeah.
Like, the creation of nuclear weapons truly introduced the possibility of hell on Earth.
What other things do we have?
For positives,
Yeah.
the enactment of the Truman Doctrine of Soviet containment, because that was necessary. Now, as much as an anti-interventionist as I am, at the time, Soviet containment was necessary
Yeah.
because Stalin was a greedy bastard. He wanted more. He wanted to take over the world. He was like, Stalin was our deal with the devil to take out Hitler,
Yeah.
because Hitler, absolutely terrible person. Stalin, just as bad from a different direction, and in fact worse in many ways. Anyways, and also actually agreed with General Marshall, the only 6-star general we've ever had, and the Marshall Plan that provided aid to Western Europe to recover from World War II.
Yeah.
Something that did not happen under World War One, which that was a direct cause of World War II, was the fact there was no aid to the German people after essentially annihilating their country.
Okay. Yeah.
He created the United States Air Force. I'd say it's like maybe not necessarily a positive or a negative, but just kind of a cool thing. Like, it separated it from being the Army Air Corps to being its own branch, which it kind of needed to be.
Well, and then a recent court ruling just reversed that. And by recent, I mean like what, 5 years ago?
Something like that.
Yeah. So
Um,
now it's back to
and
the
also
same.
he was like, now, well, I can't really say anything about the Tuskegee Airmen because that was his support for that was prior to his presidency, so I can't. That was while he was vice president, so I can't really say that. So
Yeah.
I can't use that as a positive for him. He's the one who did the Berlin airlift in '48.
Yeah.
When the Soviet blockade of all of West Germany, where our only presence was literally in West Berlin, Berlin airlift. Like, Stalin jumped up saying he was going to be Billy Bad Boy on the sidewalk, and it's like, you can't say anything. What are you going to do? And Truman's like, well, I guess we'll just fly, and then sent hundreds of planes.
Yeah.
And he's like, guess what? Here, take a look at this. I see it and raise you by about 30,000 feet.
Hmm.
And, he showed great support to the NAACP.
Yeah.
He was, and he was the first president to publicly address them and
Yeah.
acknowledge their existence. That was a huge thing. Now, the negatives. He poorly handled the railroad strike in 1946. There were several missteps leading to the second Red Scare that we now know as McCarthyism.
Hmm.
And he's the one who signed the National Security Act of 1947,
Hmm.
which established the NSA secretly that remained hidden from the American people until 1975. That's a big bad for me. That's a big bad.
So I know that you're not very hawkish, but
No.
how do you feel about his, um,
Talking about Korea?
yeah, his unwillingness to allow MacArthur to continue forth?
I agree with the fact that he held him back, because look at it this way: this is a man who had just come off the cusp of unleashing nuclear fire upon the world.
Yeah.
He was afraid it was going to turn into that, because remember, we had primary source reports coming out of the Korean conflict theater where
Hmm.
massive battalions of Chinese soldiers were running at machine gun nests until the barrels melted.
Yeah.
That takes tens of thousands of rounds.
Yeah.
So when you have an enemy that is that dedicated to your destruction, he did not want to, and he openly said it. He didn't want to drop the bomb a third time because that's what would have happened.
Yeah.
Our hand would have been forced, and we would have had to nuke Beijing,
Yeah.
or something around there. We would have had to. And so, yeah, I'm not hawkish, and I agree with Truman's assessment, and I agree that he told MacArthur, "You better dial it back."
Yeah. Okay.
Now, yes, that led to the creation of North Korea, which is a terrible place, and it does terrible things to its people. But this is also happening after the first nuclear test, including the Tsar Bomba test by the Soviet Union, the largest known nuclear detonation at the time, with Russia openly supporting the Chinese Communist movement.
Yeah.
He saw the writing on the wall and saw total annihilation coming from a mile away.
I I will disagree on that, but I will openly admit that it's impossible for me to be objective on that question.
Okay. I mean, and to some extent, I can't be truly objective. My grandfather served in Korea.
Yeah.
I mean, so I agree with it in that, okay, that meant my grandfather would not be sent to die. But
Yeah.
at the same time, I can understand someone coming from the other side of things, like, well, that made the sacrifice of my family member or friend meaningless.
Well, and my grandfather was a Marine in World War II and in the Korean War, and
Mm-hmm.
he was very unhappy with Truman because he felt that by not continuing forth, that they made some of the sacrifices that were made meaningless because it prolonged the war for another essentially 40, 50 years and created an untenable situation.
And so I can agree with that assessment. I can grant you that. But in all honesty, we have that's looking at things from a position of historical hindsight
Yeah.
that would not have been available to Truman at that time.
It looks like of all the presidents we've had so far, Truman has had the most impossible choices.
Without a doubt. And but with those impossible choices, he has done phenomenal things. I honestly think that out of all the impossible choices that he had to make, he made the best ones that he could have, given the available information at the time. I don't think anyone could have done better. And in all honesty, even despite the NSA thing, I I gotta give him a B.
Yeah, I'm thinking of B. I hate the NSA thing, but it's like I
But
don't.
when
I
you look
mean,
at all the impossible choices that he had to make,
him and Lincoln were pretty much the only two presidents that had those same kinds of questions where it's like, no matter what you do, you're going to be wrong.
yeah,
You are going to be 100% wrong no matter what decision you make.
right. And in all honesty, even with the NSA thing, I kind of want to put him in an A because because he handled the pressures of office with as close to what you could call extreme grace and poise. He didn't shout, he didn't yell at people, he didn't cuss people out like
At least openly.
at least openly. He may have cussed in private, but he never publicly chastised people. He never showed that to the American people.
He didn't
He
fold up shop because of stress.
he stood strong and he stood fast. And there's also information that has come out in recent years that potentially indicate that the fact that the NSA was going to be created was actually hidden from Truman.
Hmm.
Now, whether or not that information truly bears out, I can't say for sure, but it's at least enough to give me pause.
I just, golly, just having that decision granted to you, like, hey, do you want to kill 500,000 innocent civilians or do you want to
It
kill
wasn't half,
2 million of your own soldiers? Pick now.
and then 5 million of theirs,
Yeah,
including
it's
civilians, women, and children.
just like, what in the world kind of
It,
decision is that?
exactly, and see, that's why I kind of want to give him an A. He did the best he possibly could at the time, and then every decision after that was tempered, knowing he might have to make that decision again.
So, who all do we have in A spot?
We've got Teddy and Jefferson.
And who do we have in B?
The top B tier is Grant. There's no Grant had nothing.
He's definitely between Jefferson and Grant.
I'd say he's even better than Teddy. Like he's not a like I think he's better than Teddy because Teddy wanted to make those kinds of decisions.
Yeah.
Truman never did, but he did it and he did the best he could. He did the best anyone could have, I think. Even with historical hindsight in play, I don't think anyone else could have made those decisions in the way that Truman did or could have made better decisions than what Truman did.
He was perhaps a little too stoic to be considered better than Teddy in my book because a president needs enough of a personality that people can understand and trust the decision. And he played it so close to the chest that you didn't really get a leadership personality reading off of him.
Okay. Then I'll put him at the bottom of A. But like the A is well deserved, I think. Because he definitely had more to have to work with and deal with than Grant ever did, than anybody in here did.
Yeah.
Because okay, yeah, JFK felt pressure with the Cuban Missile Crisis, but nothing akin to the horror that Truman endured.
And JFK, the pressure he felt, he knew what the right decision was. It was how to do it without causing a problem because it's a chess
Exactly.
game that you're dealing with personalities.
Exactly. Whereas with Truman, let's go Star Trek. It was a Kobayashi Maru. It was a
Yeah.
no win. And
Probably not the.
unfortunately, it wasn't a situation where he could just cheat the system.
Yeah.
He couldn't just reprogram the test. Anyway, next up is John Tyler. Oh, good lord. So John Tyler's an interesting one. Whig Party, 1841, 1845.
I'm going to do the old man thing where I put the glasses on my forehead.
Okay, so there were essentially no positives to his presidency, though that wasn't entirely Tyler's fault.
Yeah.
Because this is due in large part to direct opposition to literally everything he did or tried by his own party, in particular at the behest of the party leader, Henry Clay, who was pissed because John Tyler won the primary and he didn't.
Oh gosh.
And before that, Clay had multiple presidential bids before and after that never came to fruition.
I just want everyone to know that this is literally the Republican Party in every single state in America right now. What was just described.
Uh-huh. So, and to the point where Henry Clay got, in the middle of his presidency, got Tyler expelled from the Whig Party. But this has ultimately led to the downfall of the Whigs, and that eventually gave rise to the Republican Party.
Are you sure this is actually Henry Clay and John Tyler and not like Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump?
Yeah, we're talking about John Tyler and Henry Clay here.
Okay.
So here's the negatives. He was an expansionist. He raised tariffs in the Tariff of 1842, which based on available information, seemed to have prolonged the already 5-year running Panic of 1837.
Okay.
So kind of a potential mishandling there. And then he attempted to forcibly assimilate Native Americans after the end of the Second Seminole War.
Oh.
Yeah, so the negatives are pretty negative, but his forcible assimilation was mostly sending missionaries and not military.
Okay, but missionaries with what?
Basically trying to instill in them Christian beliefs and stuff like that. Not
No.
not to the extent of like the Canadian reform schools.
It was with they brought tainted goods with them. I believe those were smallpox blankets.
Okay, we did not. Okay, so the smallpox blankets thing, I have to disagree with,
Okay.
because we didn't know that would spread the disease. We didn't. The germ theory of disease wasn't developed until, let's see, when was that developed? Like the 1880s, I want to say.
Oh, there would have been enough information to know around the time of Joseph Lister using antiseptic.
I don't know.
Anytime after Joseph Lister, people should have known. Like, people in government should have known. Because it would have been published at
So
that
okay,
point.
so it goes back. So like the basics go back to 1546, but this is what gave stuff like miasma theory and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um, so there was smallpox vaccination in
Hmm.
Europe with cowpox and stuff like that, but no one knew how it worked. No one
Yeah.
knew how to extend it to other diseases. No one knew how smallpox spread except through direct contact. But people didn't know that smallpox could live on blankets.
Yeah.
They didn't. Then there was that transitional period in the late 1850s with the work of Louis Pasteur, which this work was later extended by Robert Koch in the 1880s. By the end of the decade of the 1880s, that was when miasma theory was thrown out and the germ theory of disease was formed.
Okay.
Viruses
So
viruses weren't even discovered until the 1890s.
fair enough.
Like, I'm sorry, the smallpox blanket thing was nonsense. It has always been nonsense.
Okay, but by nonsense, what you're saying is not that it didn't happen, but that it wasn't
It
known.
was not intentional.
Yes. Okay. On the same page now.
Yeah, like it was not the intent to wage
The intent was
biological
to
warfare.
introduce culture, not introduce disease.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They were not deliberately trying to kill people off. It was
And
not
not
a
introducing culture to anyone that didn't have culture, introducing a different culture to a
to
different
an already
culture.
thriving culture.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I
So
know for a fact that that quote will be taken out of context
oh for
someday
sure.
whenever I'm running for office.
Probably so. And so for me, Tyler, like I think he belongs in the D tier. In be- I think in between Taft and Fillmore.
Okay.
Because Fillmore was way more aggressive towards Native Americans than Tyler was.
Yeah.
Next up is gonna be Martin Van Buren. It,
Okay.
oh yeah, like the king of sideburns. If John Quincy Adams was the captain of burns, this man is the king of them. This man's sideburns go all the way up the side of his damn head. This guy
Listen,
put
Martin Van Baggins.
this guy puts Lemmy to shame with the mutton chops. So he was a Democrat, served from 1837 to 1841. Positives were he did continue support of formal diplomatic recognition of the Republic of Texas. I'd say that's an overall positive.
Yeah.
Here's where we get to some bad stuff. So he poorly handled the start of the Panic of 1837, which is what caused it to run into the 1840s and become a problem for John Tyler.
Right.
He continued support of the Second Seminole War.
Yep.
He continued the oppression of the Cherokee Nation by forcing them off their land after forcing them to cede territory in the essentially nearly bogus Treaty of New Echota in 1835. He enforced it.
So we're
But
trying to figure out how far into the F zone he is.
and sent documentedly another 20,000 Cherokee members of the Cherokee Nation down the Trail of Tears. Oh no, he's going to get further down with this last point. Openly opposed the abolition of slavery, which was made very clear in the case of the Amistad in 1839.
Oh, that was him.
That was him. I put him in between Jackson and Monroe because Jackson was responsible for way more than 20,000 deaths when it came to the Cherokee Nation.
And that's one of the things people need to realize that are watching this is 20,000 is a far larger number in terms of population inflation
In the
when you're looking at
1840s, yeah.
yes, that is probably like whatever the population of the Earth was at that time.
That would have had a demonstrable impact.
Yeah, that's a huge amount.
Yeah. So, like, yeah, that puts him firmly in F category. Firmly F tier. Like,
He's really just tied with Jackson when you bring in the Amistad thing as well, because
yeah.
he needed to keep his head out of that as president. You know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we got some good stuff here. We got George Washington.
All right.
The man who didn't want to be president.
30 dicks.
The man who didn't want to be president. The man who
20 foot tall.
he wasn't 20 feet tall. He was very tall for that time. Like he was 6'3". Like
You know the
that.
meme, right?
You'll have to remind me after we're done. We're already two
There's a
hours and 10
stupid
minutes in.
video. We'll watch it later.
Okay, we're 2 hours and 10 minutes in. We're almost done here. Like the only president of the United States to serve under no political party. He was so beloved that they wanted him to be president that he had a unanimous support across Federalists and Anti-Federalists to be president. The only president to be a truly independent to some degree was president from 1789 to 1797. He served 2 terms. People begged him to run for a third, and that is where the tradition of no president serving more than 2 terms came, and was not undone until FDR. And then we codified it into an amendment. Like, he starts in S tier. I don't think there's anything to bring him down from there, in all honesty.
Fair.
Because, like, he was the first president of the country after a revolution, and the country survived him being president.
Is there anything negative at all about him that you can find
I
that's about being president, not a personal life stuff?
Aside from a couple of people like John Adams not really liking him that much, but there again there was long-standing animosity on the personal side between Washington and Adams for years
Yeah.
prior to that. Like, I really could not find anything just demonstrably negative about George Washington. I mean, like, he's the OG.
There you
He's
go.
the original George.
It's just him and Lincoln up there battling it out for greatest president of all time.
I would honestly put them like side by side.
Yeah.
I mean, you got the OG and you got the Great Emancipator. Like, I think they're the only two that deserve to be up there, personally.
Yeah.
And then Woodrow Wilson.
Voldemort himself.
The guy who belongs in Hell's basement. Like, I like him even less than I like Buchanan. And Buchanan belongs in that basement with him.
He's one of those presidents where the more you read about him, the more you hate him.
Yeah. Now, granted, I will give him 3 things. 3 positives. They don't come anywhere close to outweighing the bad that he did. But I will give him 3 things. 1, the Federal Trade Commission Act of 1914. That was a net positive for the country. The FTC is a good thing overall. What it has turned into since, say, like the late 80s, early 90s, not so much, but the overall effect of the FTC has been a positive thing for the country.
I'd say maybe it's the opposite, where it was probably intended to something terrible, but they just couldn't screw it up bad enough, and it's actually kind of getting better with age.
Yeah, I think that's really kind of the case there. The Clayton Antitrust Act of 1914, which actually built on the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. Like, that was a good thing.
Yeah.
And he reduced tariffs. Now let's get into the bad. And for those of you watching that don't know anything about Woodrow Wilson,
Buckle up.
Buckle up. And here's the thing: I'm only gonna touch on 3 things. I'm only gonna touch on 3 things, and that's gonna make you want to put him in Hell's basement or under.
Before we go
Hell's
further,
basement.
for every person out there who doesn't want monuments to be renamed, you're not going to want your children to go to a high school named after this man after Drew is done.
No, you're not. So, all right, kiddies, y'all buckled up, y'all strapped in, because we about to go for a ride, and it's not going to be a pleasant one. So, hey Harry, let me ask you a question.
Hmm.
Do you like the idea of the draft?
I hate it.
Really? Well, you know who you can thank for it? You can thank Woodrow Wilson and his Selective Service Act of 1917.
Yeah, I believe Rothbard is the one that said that a draft is involuntary servitude.
It is indeed, and I believe you are correct.
Yep.
So, hey, Harry, you like the idea of women's suffrage, right?
Yeah, they should vote.
Exactly. That wouldn't put you in very good company with our buddy Woodrow here. He openly opposed women's suffrage, stating his belief, and this is a direct quote, that women lacked the necessary public experience to be good voters. Purportedly, he changed his mind later on, yet there's no indication that he ever voiced it, that he ever said anything, which I think is mostly somebody's making something up to make him seem like less of a trash person. Hey, Harry, I got one more question for you.
Is it what's my favorite movie?
No. I was gonna ask you what your least favorite movie is, but I bet I can go ahead and guess what it is.
Oh,
Uh,
it's the first feature film ever made. I absolutely hate that movie.
oh, okay. So you're talking about Birth of a Nation, aren't you?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah. Tell the little kiddies at home, for those of them who don't know, what is Birth of a Nation exactly?
Uh, Birth of the Nation is the
Because it's got such a
first.
wonderful title. It's got a
Yeah,
wonderful title to it.
it's the first full length film, so it has a place in history because of that. It is about how the KKK saved a city from actors wearing blackface that were intended to be black people who were somehow attacking white people, and
Mm.
it's a story about how the Klan is a heroic organization, and that's the history that they wanted to share in the first Hollywood film ever. I don't know if it was Hollywood, but the first feature film.
Wow. Yeah. Sounds very distinguished. Sounds very non-propaganda at all.
Yeah, so
Um,
something you wouldn't expect to be shown at like the most backwards cult meeting in the middle of nowhere. No one should be filming this in any like old, decrepit, grungy porn theater that hasn't been used since the 70s.
right. Well, see, here's a really interesting thing. You want to know where it was screened?
I have a good feeling I know this.
Yeah. So the KKK propaganda film "Birth of a Nation" was screened at the White House by Woodrow Wilson during his presidency, and he is directly quoted in the film.
Yeah.
So everybody out in YouTube land, not TV land, I think we're pretty square in putting this jackass in Hell's basement. In fact, I think we're gonna go so far as to add a row below, and it's just gonna have and it's just gonna be called the Woodrow.
Please tell me it's the actual seventh category, so it's the seventh circle of terrible presidents.
Yeah, and we're just gonna make it gray. No, because then people can't read it. We're gonna make it pink. Pink for women
Who he didn't want to vote.
who he didn't want to vote. Exactly. Oh, it messed it up. Anyways, we're gonna put that there. So we're gonna change that setting. Boom. There we go. We're
Uh,
gonna, and we're gonna change that to. I think I had it as like this blue color.
Also, his foreign policy was pretty atrocious. It
Oh yeah,
was,
the 14 points. That was just great.
yeah.
There we go. We corrected the list. So, to recap everything just real quick, in S tier, we got us the OG and the Great Emancipator, George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. Let's see. In A tier, we got Thomas Jefferson, Teddy Roosevelt, and Harry S. Truman. In B tier, we've got Ulysses S. Grant, Benjamin Harrison, JFK, and Calvin Coolidge. C tier, we've got our buddies LBJ, Dwight David Eisenhower, George H.W. Bush, Rutherford B. Hayes, Ronald Reagan, Gerald Ford, Warren G. Harding, William McKinley, James K. Polk, FDR, and not Martin Van Buren, John Quincy Adams. The sideburns, man, they threw me off. And I'm on a roll here because I'm not looking at a list or nothing. In D tier, in oh dear tier.
Oh dear.
Yeah, oh dear tier. We got ourselves George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, Jimmy Carter, Richard Nixon, William Howard Taft, John Tyler, Millard Fillmore, James Madison, James Monroe, Chester A. Arthur, Herbert Hoover, and Andrew Johnson. In F tier, where they rightly belong, Grover Cleveland, Franklin Pierce. This is Monroe. That's John Adams. Martin Van Buren, Andrew Jackson, James Buchanan, and in Hell's basement where he belongs, we have Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah.
We're not gonna.
That is our.
That is our presidential tier list, everybody. Alrighty, so tell us what you think down in the comments, and look forward to seeing y'all in the next video when we get around to making one. We'll tell you more about that, well, when you see the next video. So until next time, again, my name is Drew. Thanks to Harry. Harry, you can go ahead and say bye again.
Bye, Harry.
You screwed it up. I said say bye again.
Bye again.
There you go. Much better. Anyways, thank you all for tuning in to another episode of the Political Reformation. Hope you enjoyed this video. Leave us a like, comment, subscribe down below, and have a great rest of your day. And remember, be politically active. Don't be politically ignorant.